The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 1, By the River. It was a lovely spring day in the country. The little animal called the mole had been working hard all morning. He was cleaning his house, which was under the ground. He cleaned every part of his house with soap and water. Then he swept the floors. Soon the mole was very dirty and tired. He wanted to go outside and see the beautiful day. "I'm tired of cleaning," he said to himself cheerfully. He dropped his broom and ran out of his house without even putting on his coat. The mole had created some paths under the ground. These paths led from his house up to the grass. Soon the mole was standing in a pretty green field. The sun was shining brightly, and a strong, cool wind was blowing. "This is much better than cleaning," cried the mole. Birds were singing loudly, happy that winter was over. The mole felt very happy to be alive. He jumped in the air with excitement and began to run across the field. "Just a moment!" the mole heard a voice say nearby. It was an old rabbit. "It will cost you money to pass by this private road." But the mole didn't listen to him. Many other rabbits were watching him pass by, whispering to each other. Mole just laughed at the rabbits. He thought they were very stupid animals. Mole thought that everything around him seemed too beautiful and good to be real. In every tree, birds were building their nests and laying eggs. Flowers and new leaves were growing. Mole didn't care that he still had much more cleaning to do. He suddenly felt as if he was on a vacation after the long, cold winter. Just when the mole thought that things couldn't get any better, he saw something amazing that he had never seen before. It was a river. Mole ran over to the river's edge and stared at the shining water. It was so beautiful and mysterious. Moles are animals that live under the ground, and so Mole had never been in the water before. As the river water passed him by, it made strange noises. To Mole, it seemed that the river was laughing. Mole walked slowly along the river's edge for a while. When he felt tired, he sat down on the warm grass and listened to the beautiful sounds of the water. As he rested, Mole noticed something on the other side of the river. It was a small hole in a hill. He thought about how nice it would be to live inside that hole. You could always hear the river water flowing by your house. As he stared at the hole, he saw something moving inside it. Mole looked more closely. He realized that there was someone in the hole, and he was watching him. Soon, a little brown animal with small ears, a long tail, and bright shining eyes came out of the hole. It was the water rat. "Hello, Mole," said the rat. "Hello, Rat," said the mole. Mole and Rat did not know each other. They stood still and looked at each other carefully. "Would you like to come and visit?" asked the rat after a few moments. "Well, I don't know," said the mole. It was a little afraid of the water because he had never seen it before. The rat walked down to the edge of the river. He stepped into a small blue boat. It was the perfect size for two animals. Mole was very interested. The rat rowed the little boat across the river towards Mole. "Come on, get in," he said, giving Mole his paw. The mole stepped carefully into the boat and sat down in the front of it. "This has been a wonderful day," he said excitedly to the rat. Did you know that I've never been in a boat before?"
"What?" cried the rat. "You've never been in a boat? Well, what have you been doing your whole life then?"
"Is riding in a boat really so nice?" said the mole. He made himself comfortable.
"Riding in a boat is the best thing to do," said the rat, as he began to push the boat into the river's current. "Believe me, my friend, there is nothing more fun than riding in a boat."
For a few minutes after this, the rat didn't speak. He seemed to be thinking happily about boats. "Look out, rat!" cried Mole suddenly. But it was too late. The little boat hit the land next to the river, and the rat fell over on his back. But he wasn't hurt.
"Oh, yes, there's nothing nicer than a boat," said the rat,
as if nothing had happened, while standing up.
"Listen here, if you really don't have anything to do this morning, why don't we travel down the river for a while?"
The mole couldn't believe his good luck. His whole body moved with excitement. "What a day this is," he said. "Let's begin at once."
"All right, wait just a moment,"
said the rat. He reached down and picked up a basket.
"Put the basket under your feet," he said to Mole.
"What's inside it?" asked Mole.
"Oh, just a little lunch," said the rat. "Cold chicken, cold ham, cold beef, pickles, salad, bread, sandwiches, soda water, ginger beer."
"Stop!" cried the mole happily. "It's too much."
"Do you think so?" asked the rat seriously. "I always like to take a little snack with me on my trips. The other animals are always telling me I never bring enough to eat."
But the mole was not listening. He was too busy staring at the wonderful new world around him. He put his paw into the cool water and lay back in the boat. The water rat didn't disturb him. Instead, he guided the boat down the river. After a little while, the mole sat up. "I'm sorry, rat," he said. "You must think that I'm very rude for not speaking. It's just that I've never seen anything like this before. So this is a river."
"The river?" said the rat.
"And you really live next to the river? What a happy life!"
"Yes, the river is the only home I have ever had. I don't want any other," said the rat. "In winter, summer, spring, or autumn, the river is always full of beauty and excitement."
"But doesn't it get boring and lonely? Just you and a river?" asked the mole. "Don't you want someone to talk to?"
"Boring and lonely?" cried the rat. "Well, I must understand that you don't know the river. The truth is that my neighborhood is very crowded. Many animals are moving away. Many otters and water birds live here. They always want me to play with them as if I didn't have important things to do."
Suddenly the mole saw something interesting. "Rat, what's that over there?" he said, pointing.
"Oh, that's just the wild forest," said the rat. "We river animals don't go there very much."
"Aren't there nice animals in there?" asked the mole. He felt a little nervous.
"Well," said the rat slowly, "let me think. The squirrels are all right. Some of the rabbits are nice, but others aren't. And then there's Badger, of course. He's a wonderful old friend. He lives right in the middle of the forest, and he wouldn't live anywhere else, not if you paid him. No one tries to bother him. They'd better not," he said.
"What do you mean? Why would anyone bother him?" asked Mole.
"Well, there are other animals," said the rat. "Weasels and foxes and others. Sometimes they're nice to me, but you can't trust them. Sometimes they decide that they don't like you. You have to be very careful when you enter the wild forest." The mole knew that it is against animal custom to worry about things that might happen in the future. He changed the subject. "What is beyond the wild forest?" he asked. "I think I see some hills or towns, but I'm not sure."
"Beyond the wild forest is the great wide world," said the rat. "I've never been there, and I'm never going to go there. The world isn't important, not to you or me. If you're smart, you won't go there. Don't ever mention it again, please. Now, it's time for lunch. Here's where we get out." The rat guided the boat next to the land, and the two animals got out. They sat on a little hill beside the river. The hill was surrounded by a few beautiful old trees. The trees were so old that their branches touched the water. It was so beautiful that the mole could not speak. Mole and rat took all the food out of the basket. Each dish was more delicious than the last. When everything was sitting on the blanket, the rat said, "Let's eat," and the mole was happy to obey. For a while, the two new friends didn't talk. They were too busy eating. After a while, the rat said, "What are you looking at?" The mole was staring at something in the water. "I see some bubbles in the water, and they're moving. It looks like something in the water is swimming towards us," said the mole. "Aha!" cried the rat. "Just wait." In a few seconds, Mole saw a large brown otter climb out of the water. The otter sat next to him. He shook the water from his body. "You greedy pigs," he said, laughing. "Why didn't you invite me to your party, rat?" "Oh, it was a very small party," said Rat. "Otter, this is my friend Mole." "Nice to meet you," said Otter. And the two animals were friends from then on. "It seems that everyone is outside today," said the otter. "I was just trying to have a peaceful swim, but then I found you two." Suddenly the three animals heard some noises behind them. They turned around and saw another animal coming out of the bushes. It was the badger. "Hello, old badger," shouted the rat. The badger looked at them with his small eyes. Company," he said, and disappeared. "That's the kind of animal he is," said the rat happily. "He hates society. Now we won't see any more of him today."
"Tell us, Otter, who else is out on the river today?"
"Well, Toad is here," said the otter. "I saw him in his new boat." Rat and Otter looked at each other and laughed loudly. "You know Toad," said the otter. "He gets bored so easily. He's always getting tired of one project and starting something else. One day it's a new boat, and the next day it's something else. He'll get tired of his boat before 2 days are over, I'm sure." From where they sat, they could see a shiny new boat coming down the river. There was a toad guiding the boat. He was making a lot of noise and moving the boat around in the water. "Silly toad," said the rat. "He doesn't know anything about boats. I'm sure he'll fall into the water." And with that, the otter jumped back into the water and disappeared as quickly as he had come. The mole and the rat rested on the grass for a while longer. Soon the rat said, "Well, I guess it's time to pack up the lunch basket." He didn't sound so excited about this, because cleaning up is not much fun. "Oh, please, let me do it," said the mole, and of course the rat agreed. After everything was cleaned up, the two animals got back into the boat. The rat prepared to return to his house. They were traveling back the way they had come. It was late afternoon, and the rat was in a calm, happy mood. He was rowing the boat slowly and saying poetry to himself. He wasn't paying much attention to the mole. Mole was feeling very pleased and excited about his adventures. He was also feeling a little restless. After a while he said, "Please, Rat, Let me row the boat now." But the rat only shook his head and smiled. "Not yet, my young friend. Wait until you've had some lessons. It's not as easy as it looks." The mole was quiet for a few minutes, but the desire to row the boat was very strong, and he began to feel a little jealous of Rat. He said to himself that he could row just as well as his friend. Suddenly, before Rat had time to stop him, Mole jumped up and grabbed the oars. "Mole, you silly animal!" cried Rat. "You'll fall in!" But the mole was not listening. He tried to push the oars into the water, but he slipped and fell over backwards into the boat. The little boat suddenly turned over, and the two animals fell into the water. How cold the water was, and how dark! Mole could not swim. He tried to keep his head above water, but he began to sink. He felt terrified. Suddenly, he felt a paw grab him by the neck, and the next thing he knew, his head was above the water. Rat was an excellent swimmer, of course. He was laughing as he helped Mole to the river's shore. Mole was too shocked, wet, cold, and ashamed to say anything for a moment. "Now, run around in the warm sun for a while and dry off. I'm going to dive into the river and find the boat and the lunch basket." Mole was wet on the outside and unhappy on the inside. He walked around for a while in the sun. Rat found the boat, the basket, and his other things. Soon everything had been put inside the boat. Mole was seated in the boat once more. Mole said in a very sad voice, "Rat, my fine friend, I am very sorry. I have been very stupid, and I know it. My heart almost breaks when I think that I might have lost your lovely lunch basket and the other things. Can you ever forgive me?" "That's all right, dear Mole," said the rat. "A little water never hurt anything. Most of the time I'm swimming in the river anyway. Don't think about it any more. But listen, don't you think you'd better come and stay with me for a while? My home is very plain. It's not like Toad's. Oh, I forgot. You haven't seen Toad's house yet. I'll make sure you're happy. I'll teach you to row and boat and swim until you're as skilled on the river as I am." The mole was so touched by this great kindness that he could not speak for a minute. He wiped away some happy tears with his paw. The rat, who was very kind, gave him time to calm himself. Soon the mole felt better, and he was even able to shout at some water birds who were laughing at his wet and messy appearance. Soon Mole and Rat arrived at Rat's house. Rat made a big, warm fire. Mole sat down in a large, comfortable chair. Rat gave him some slippers and a warm robe. He told Mole stories of the river and the forest until it was time for dinner. For Mole, who lived underground, these stories were amazing and interesting. After supper, Mole was so sleepy that Rat had to help him to his little bed. As Mole fell asleep, he could hear the river water singing outside. And so Mole's first day with Rat ended. But that was only the beginning of many more exciting days to come as spring turned into summer. Mole learned to swim, and to row the boat, and to fish. He became acquainted with many river animals, and became close friends with the water rat. Chapter 2. On the Road. One bright summer morning, the mole turned to the rat and said, "Rat, could you do me a favor?" The rat was singing a song to himself about some ducks who were his friends. Rat enjoyed making up songs and poems in his head about many things. All morning, Rat and Mole had been sitting by the river.
Sometimes Rat would jump into the water and swim around. However, it seemed to Mole that the ducks didn't like Rat's song very much. After he finished singing the song, Rat said, "What? Oh, you want me to do you a favor? What is it, my young friend?" "Well, I was wondering if you would take me to visit Mr. Toad. I've heard so much about him, and I'd love to meet him," said Mole. "Of course," said Rat. He forgot about songs and poetry for the day. "Let's get the boat ready, and then we'll go. Toad always loves visitors, day or night. He's always in a good mood and glad to see you, and sorry when you have to leave." "He sounds like a very nice animal," said Mole. "He certainly is. He's very kind and cheerful. Perhaps he isn't the most intelligent of all animals, but we can't all be smart, can we? He is a little vain, but Toad has some very great qualities," said the Rat. Soon the two friends came to a turn in the river. They saw a large, beautiful old house with grass coming down to the river's edge. "That is Toad's house. It's called Toad Hall. Toad is very rich, as you can see," said Rat. "He has a place for boats and some stables for horses. Over there is the dining building, over there. Really, Toad Hall is the most beautiful house in the area, although we don't want Toad to know." Rat and Mole arrived at the place where Toad kept his boats. Mole saw that Toad owned many different kinds of boats. However, they all looked as if they had not been used in a long time. "I understand," said Rat. "Remember when I told you that Toad is always getting bored? He's decided that riding in a boat is boring. Now he's interested in something else. Well, let's go find him. I'm sure he'll tell us the whole story, whether we want to hear it or not." Mole and Rat found Toad sitting on the grass outside his house. He was studying a large map. When he saw Mole and Rat, he cried, "This is wonderful!" and jumped up. He shook Mole's paw quickly, without asking his name. "How kind of you to come and see me. I was just going to send someone to find you, Rat. I need your help. I need both of you. Now, what would you like to eat or drink? I have everything." "Wait a minute, Toad. Let's sit down quietly for a minute," said Rat. He sat down in a chair. The Mole sat next to Rat. Mole told Toad politely that he had a very fine house. "Oh, of course I do. It's the finest house in the area, or anywhere else in the world," cried Toad. "Now, listen here. You two are just the animals I wanted. You've got to help me. It's very important." "Do you need help with your boat?" asked the Rat. "Oh, forget about boating," cried Toad. "I'm finished with that. Riding in a boat is for children. I feel sorry for the two of you. You're always riding in a boat and wasting your energy. You could be doing something much more fun. I have discovered the greatest entertainment. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing it. Come with me, and you'll see what I mean." Toad took Mole and Rat around to the side of the house. There they saw a large wagon. It was painted in many colors and with red and green wheels. "While I'm driving this wagon, I'm going to have a life of great adventure," said Toad. "I'll travel out into the great world, see the country, and meet people. I'll even see towns and cities. In a wagon, you can be one place today and another the next day. The whole world is yours to see. Travel, change, interest, and excitement. And don't worry, this is the finest wagon that was ever built. I designed it myself." Mole and Rat did not know what to think. They didn't think adventures sounded very fun. However, when they examined the wagon, they saw that it was very comfortable. There were comfortable beds to sleep in. There was also a cooking stove, a place to store food, and a small table and chairs. An animal could travel on the road very nicely in this wagon. "Everything's here, you see," said Toad. "I've got food, games, and supplies in this wagon. Everything's ready, so we can begin traveling this afternoon." Rat stared at Toad. "Begin traveling this afternoon? My dear Toad, what are you talking about?" "Now, my dear good old Rat, don't be silly. You know you've simply got to come with me. I couldn't possibly do it without you. Are you telling me that you're going to sit by the river for the rest of your life and play with that boat? I won't let you." "I'm going to show you the world, my boy," cried Toad, dancing around in circles. "I don't care," said Rat firmly. "I'm not going with you, and that's final. And I'm going to sit by the river for the rest of my life. I'll live in my boat and my little house, and Mole is going to do the same thing. Aren't you, Mole?" "Of course I am, Rat," said Mole. Mole was a very loyal friend. "I'll always stay with you and do what you do. But, well, Toad's idea sounds like it might be fun, don't you think?" he said. Poor Mole. Until recently, Mole had lived a very quiet life. Now he was living with Rat and doing all sorts of new things. So the idea of even greater adventure, out in the great world, sounded frightening, but also very wonderful. But he didn't want to make Rat unhappy, so he didn't know what to do. The Rat realized what his friend Mole was thinking, and he thought about it. He liked the Mole very much. He would do almost anything for him. Meanwhile, Toad was watching both Mole and Rat very closely. "Well, come inside and have some lunch," Toad said. "We'll talk about it. We don't need to decide anything immediately. Of course, I don't care if we go or not. I only want to make you animals happy. Live for other people, that's what I always say." During lunch, which was very delicious, the Toad talked mostly to Mole. He really wanted to go traveling. He knew that if he could persuade Mole to go, the Rat would agree. So Toad talked about the great world outside. He said that there was much excitement and happiness to be found there. This made the Mole very excited. The Rat was much too kind and good to disappoint his friends, so soon it was agreed that they would travel for a while. They made many plans about what they would do each day and where they would go. When they had finished lunch and were ready to go, Toad asked his friends to go and capture the old gray horse who had to pull the wagon. The horse was not very happy with this job, so it took some time to catch him. Meanwhile, Toad gathered up more supplies and put them in the wagon. At last, everything was ready, and the three animals began their trip. Sometimes they rode in the wagon, and sometimes they walked along beside it. It was a beautiful, warm afternoon. As they traveled down the road, they saw many fruit trees with birds sitting on their branches. Many other animals called out to them and told them, "Good afternoon." Even the Rat agreed that it was a lot of fun. Late in the afternoon, the three friends stopped to eat a simple evening meal. They sat on the grass next to the wagon. Toad talked about everything he wanted to do in the days to come, and all the adventures he wanted to have. Soon the yellow moon rose, and stars shone in the sky. As the three animals were going to sleep, Toad said, "Well, boys, this is the life for a gentleman, isn't it? And you talk about your old river." "I don't talk about it, Toad," said the Rat patiently, "but I think about it every day." Mole knew that Rat missed the river already. He reached over and touched his friend's paw. "I'll do whatever you like, Rat," he said very quietly. "Should we leave Toad tomorrow morning? We could return to our dear old home by the river."
"Thanks, but I think I should stay with Toad. It wouldn't be safe to leave him here by himself. Who knows what might happen to him? Besides, this trip won't last very long. Toad will get bored with this wagon and become interested in something else."
"Good night," whispered Rat. Well, what happened was that the trip ended even sooner than the Rat expected. After so much excitement on the day before, Toad slept very late, and it was hard to wake him up. So Mole and Rat had to do all the hard work. They cared for the horse, gathered food, and made breakfast. By the time Toad woke up, his friends were very tired. Of course, Toad was very excited. "What an easy life it is living in the wagon," he said. "We don't have to worry about cleaning up our houses or doing any hard work at all." Mole and Rat just looked at each other and didn't say anything. They had a very nice morning traveling around the country. For the rest of the day, Mole and Rat made sure that Toad worked just as much as they did. Therefore, by the morning of the second day, Toad was just as tired as his friends. He did not talk any more about the easy life. That day the three travelers reached a very large road. It was the first large road they had ever seen. They were all walking on the road next to the wagon. The Mole was talking to the horse, who wanted some attention. Toad and Rat were walking behind the wagon. Toad was telling Rat a long story, but Rat was not really listening. He was thinking of other things. Suddenly, all the animals heard a very strange noise behind them. Looking behind them, they saw a cloud of dust. There was a large black thing traveling toward them at great speed. The thing made strange, loud noises. The animals did not know what it was. They did not pay attention to it. Instead, they continued to talk to each other, but suddenly the thing almost knocked over the wagon. The three animals jumped into the grass on the side of the road. They watched as the thing passed them by, going very fast. It was really a shiny new car. But Mole and Rat had never seen a car. They didn't know what it was. In a second, it was gone. The horse was terribly frightened and pushed the wagon off the road. The wagon turned over and lay there broken. "You criminals!" shouted the Rat. "You almost killed us! I'll report you to the police!" He was so angry that he jumped up and down. He had forgotten about how much he missed the river. Toad stood in the middle of the road and stared after the disappearing car. He didn't say anything. He only looked amazed. The Mole was busy trying to calm the horse. Then he went to look at the wagon, which was terribly broken. Mole and Rat tried to turn the cart over, but it was too heavy. "Hey, Toad!" cried the Rat. "Don't just stand there! Come and help us!" But the Toad didn't do anything. He only stared into the distance as if he had seen a ghost. He had a happy smile on his face. The Rat shook him. "Toad, what is the matter with you? Aren't you coming to help us?" he said. "What a wonderful machine!" said Toad. He was not moving. "How fast it was, and how beautiful! Now that's the real way to travel. The only way to travel. Why didn't I realize it before? Oh, what a joy!" "Oh, don't be stupid, Toad," cried the Mole. But Toad didn't pay attention. "Oh, to think that I never knew," he continued. "All those years without a car. But now I realize that driving a car is the only thing for me to do. As I travel through the great world, I'll go faster than anyone else. I won't care if I throw wagons off the road.
I'll have great adventures. Oh, what a happy day!"
"What are we going to do with him?" Mole asked Rat.
"We're not going to do anything," said Rat firmly. "We're not going to listen to anything he says. You see, I know Toad very well. Right now all he can think about is that awful car. He'll be talking like this for days, and he won't do anything else. So let's just forget about him. Let's go and see what to do about the wagon."
Mole and Rat decided that the wagon was too broken to be fixed. Rat untied the horse and said to Mole,
"Come on, it's 5 or 6 miles to the nearest town. We'd better start walking if we want to find a place to sleep before dark."
"But what about Toad?" cried Mole. "We can't just leave him here sitting in the middle of the road. What if another one of those terrible cars comes along?"
"Forget about Toad," cried Rat angrily. "I'm finished with him."
So Mole and Rat and the horse began to walk towards the nearest town without Toad. But soon Toad caught up with them. He didn't speak to them because he was still thinking about the car.
"Now listen, Toad," said the Rat angrily. "When we get to the town, you'll have to go to the police station and report what happened. See if they know who that terrible car belongs to. Then you have to go and see who can repair our wagon. The Mole and I will find a place for us all to stay until the wagon's fixed."
"Talk to the police? Me? Why?" said Toad.
"And why would I want to repair the wagon? I'm finished with wagons forever. I never want to see that wagon again."
"Oh, Rat, you can't imagine how grateful I am to you for agreeing to come on this trip. I wouldn't have gone without you, and then I would never have seen that wonderful car. I might never have heard its wonderful sounds and seen its amazing speed. I owe it all to you, Rat."
The Rat turned to Mole. "Oh, I give up," he said. "He's ridiculous." "All right, when we get to the town, we'll find a train station. If we're lucky, we can find a train that will take us back to the river tonight. And you won't see me going anywhere with this silly animal again."
During the rest of the long walk, the Rat only spoke to Mole. When they finally reached the town, Mole and Rat went straight to the train station. They put Toad on a train and gave one of the train workers some money to watch him very carefully. When they finally arrived at Toad Hall that night, they told Toad's housekeeper to feed him and put him to bed. Toad was like someone who is walking in his sleep. He was dreaming of owning a car. Finally, Mole and Rat got out their little boat and returned to Rat's house by the river. They made themselves a nice warm fire and a very late dinner. Rat was once again very happy. The next evening, Mole was sitting by the river and fishing. He had woken up late in the morning. All day he had rested and relaxed. The Rat, who had been visiting some other friends, came to find him.
"Mole, have you heard the news?" he said. "Everyone is talking about it. This morning Toad took the train and went into town. And what do you think he did? He has bought a very large and expensive car."
Chapter 3. The Wild Forest. For a long time now, the Mole had wanted to meet the Badger. The Badger lived in the wild forest. Badger seemed to be a very important animal. However, not many animals got the chance to talk to him. But whenever Mole asked the Rat about the Badger, Rat would always say,
"Oh, you'll meet Badger when he wants to be met. He's the best of animals."
"But couldn't we ask him to come here to dinner?" asked Mole.
"He wouldn't come. Like I said, he doesn't like company. He's very shy. He doesn't like to spend much time with others," replied the Rat.
"Well, couldn't we go to visit him?" asked Mole.
"Oh, no. He really wouldn't like that. I've never tried to visit him at his home, even though we are friends. Besides, Badger lives in the middle of the wild forest. We can't go there," said the rat.
"Why not?" asked Mole. "You said that the wild forest wasn't so bad a place."
"Yes, I know," said the rat. "But we won't go there just yet. Don't worry, the badger won't be at home at this time of year anyhow. You'll meet him someday."
So Mole waited patiently, but he never saw the badger. In the meantime, summer was ending. The days were getting shorter and colder. When winter time came, Mole and Rat stayed indoors most of the time. The rat slept a lot. When the rat was awake, he often wrote poetry or songs. Many of his friends came to visit, and they all sat around the fire discussing their summer adventures. So Mole was kept busy with all these nice things. However, one day, when Rat was sleeping in his chair, Mole decided to go out and explore the wild forest by himself. Perhaps he could even find the badger. It was cold and very gray outside. All the leaves were gone from the trees, and the branches looked like black bones. Soon Mole was entering the wild forest. The wild forest was dark and quiet in the winter. At first, there was nothing in the forest to frighten him. Mole walked around looking at the large trees and the mushrooms growing out of the ground. However, soon he walked deeper into the forest. It began to grow darker, and he began to see and hear strange things. First, Mole thought he saw small, ugly little faces looking at him. The faces appeared from tiny holes, but when he would turn around to see more clearly, the faces would disappear. Mole told himself not to imagine things and walked on. But then the whistling began. At first it was very soft, and he heard the sound from behind him. But then he heard whistling in front of him, too. Then he heard the sounds all around him, as if many animals were making the sounds. What was happening? Who was whistling? What were they going to do to him, whoever they were? Mole was getting more and more frightened. But there were worse things about to happen. Mole began to hear the sounds of small feet running behind him. But when he would turn to look, there was never anyone there. Did awful ghosts live in the forest? Mole wished deeply that he never come. Suddenly, a rabbit ran out of the trees toward him. His eyes were large with fear. "Get out of here, you stupid animal! Get out now!" it said to Mole. Then the rabbit disappeared down its hole. Mole was extremely frightened. Soon the sounds of small feet grew louder, until it seemed that all the animals in the forest were running. Were they hunting or being hunted by some terrible animal? Mole didn't wait to find out. He began to run. He did not know where he was going. He ran very fast for a long time. Finally, he became too tired and had to stop running. "I've got to hide," Mole thought. He found a large hole in an old tree and hid inside it. He covered himself with leaves and sat very still. He hoped no one would see him. He sat there for a long time and listened to all the strange and terrible noises. So this is what Rat was talking about, Mole thought. How dark and frightening the wild forest is. I wish I had never come here. Meanwhile, back at the house, the rat had just woken up from another nap. He was about to start writing some more poetry when he realized that Mole wasn't in his room. "Mole, where are you?" he called out several times. There was no answer. The rat saw that Mole's coat and hat were gone, and so were his boots. The rat left the house and examined the ground. He was looking for the marks of his friend's feet in the ground.
He saw that the marks led straight in the direction of the wild forest. The rat stood and looked very serious. After a moment, he went back inside and grabbed a few small weapons in case he needed them. Then he put on his coat and hat and began walking very quickly towards the wild forest. It was almost dark by the time Rat reached the beginning of the wild forest. He walked bravely into the dark forest. He called out, "Mole! Mole! Where are you? It's me, Old Rat!" Rat was very worried, but his voice was cheerful. He called for Mole many times, but Mole didn't answer. Rat had been hunting inside the forest for more than an hour. Finally he heard a soft cry. "Rat, is that really you?" The rat looked down into the hole in the large tree and saw Mole sitting there. He was tired and shaking. "Oh, Rat," he cried, "I've been so afraid. You can't imagine." Now, it's over now," said Rat. "You really shouldn't have come in here, silly Mole. I tried to keep you from coming here. The wild forest can really be a frightening and dangerous place for small animals like us. We river animals only come in here in groups for safety. In order to travel safely in the wild forest, there are 100 things you have to know about. We know them, but you don't, just yet. You must know secret and magical words and weapons and things like that. If you're just a small animal, you've got to know how to protect yourself in here. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. Of course, Badger and Otter are safe here." "What about Toad? I'm sure he wouldn't be afraid to come in here," said the Mole. Rat laughed. "Oh, no, Toad wouldn't come in here if you paid him money," he said. "Well, come on, my friend. It's dark, and we've got to get back home." "Dear Rat, I'm extremely tired, and that's the truth," said Mole. "I'm sorry, but I have to rest for a little while if I'm going to have the strength to return home." "Oh, all right," said the rat, who was a very kind animal. "Go ahead and rest. It's already dark anyway." So the Mole went to sleep for a little while. The rat calmly waited next to him, his paw holding a gun for protection. When Mole woke up, he felt much better. He saw Rat standing outside their hiding place and saying, Well, we have a problem." Mole went outside and stood next to his friend. He saw that it was snowing. The ground and the trees were covered in beautiful white snow. He didn't recognize the forest at all. "Well, Mole, this is a problem. I don't know where we are anymore. The snow makes everything look so different," said Rat. "But we'll have to do our best to find our way home anyway. Let's go." So Mole and Rat began to walk. They tried to remember the way they had come. Unfortunately, they only became more lost. After about 2 hours of walking, the two animals had to stop and rest. They were cold, wet, and hungry, and they did not know where they were. The snow was so deep that the animals could hardly move through it. There seemed to be no way out of the terrible wild forest. "We can't rest here for too long," said the rat. "We will have to make another try. If we sit here too long, we'll become too cold. Let's go and see if there's a cave or some other kind of shelter nearby." Mole and Rat were exploring the area when Mole's leg suddenly hit something hard and very sharp. He fell down. "My leg," he cried. "I hit it on something." "Poor Mole," said Rat kindly. "This hasn't been a very good day for you, has it? Let me see if I can help. You've cut your leg. I'll tie it up with a cloth." "I must have hit it on a branch or a rock," said Mole as Rat was fixing his leg. He was very much in pain. The rat thought for a moment. "No, it looks like you hit your leg on something hard, like metal." He suddenly seemed very excited. He began searching the ground for something.
Well, it's not important what I hit my leg on. What are you doing, Rat? Said Mole. The rat was busy digging through the snow. After he had done this for about 10 minutes, the mole, who was very cold and in pain, cried, "Oh, do come on, Rat. We've got to keep moving." Suddenly the rat gave a happy shout. "I found it," he said, and danced around. "What have you found, Rat?" asked Mole. "Come and see," cried Rat. Mole looked and saw a shovel, which is a metal tool used to dig snow or dirt lying on the ground. "Rat, I don't understand why you're so excited. So you have found somebody's shovel. They were very careless to leave it lying on the ground," said Mole loudly. "But don't you understand what this means?" cried the rat. "No, I don't," said the mole. Oh dear, cried the rat. "Here, stop arguing with me and dig in the snow." After they had been digging in the snow for a little while, the rat said, "Here it is." He was pointing to a little rug on the ground. It was used to wipe your feet on before entering a house. "Now you understand, right, Mole?" "Really, Rat, we have to stop this digging in the snow. It's cold and we've got to go home," said the mole, rather angrily. "Do you mean to say that this door rug doesn't tell you anything?" the rat almost shouted. "No, of course it doesn't tell me anything. Door rugs don't talk," said the mole. The rat was really angry now. "Now listen here, you ridiculous animal. Stop talking like that immediately and get to work. Dig and hunt around on the sides of the hills. If you want to have a chance of sleeping in a warm, dry bed tonight, you've got to do what I say." The mole obeyed him, even though he thought that rat had gone a little crazy. After about 10 minutes of hard work, the rat's shovel hit something that sounded like wood. "Mole, come here and help me," cried Rat. They moved the snow away from the object. In front of them was a green door with a shiny golden sign. The sign said, "Mr. Badger." Mole was so amazed that he fell over into the snow. "Rat," he cried, "you're amazing, really amazing, and I didn't understand it. I was so foolish. I see it all now. You were trying to make me use my brain and think, but I didn't want to do it. First you saw the shovel on the ground. You thought to yourself, a shovel in the snow. This must mean someone lives near here. Now, who could it be? It's someone who lives under the ground, of course. When you found the door rug, you said, now, if there is a door rug, there must be a door nearby. And here it is. You should become a detective, Rat, if I only had your brain. But since you don't, I suppose you're going to sit in the snow all night and talk, asked the rat, rather unkindly. Get up right now and go and pull hard on that rope. That's the doorbell. I'll knock on the door. Badger lives deep inside the earth, so we have to be loud if we want him to hear us. Mole obeyed his friend. After about 10 minutes of knocking and ringing the doorbell, they heard someone coming towards the door. Chapter 4, Meeting Badger. The door opened just a few inches, and Mole and Rat heard a voice say, Now, the next time this happens, I shall be very angry. Who is it this time? Why are you disturbing me on a night like this? Oh, Badger, cried Rat. Please let us in. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole. We've lost our way in the snow. What? Rat? My dear friend, the Badger said in a very different voice. Come on in, both of you at once. Why, you must be almost frozen with cold. Oh, dear, lost in the wild forest, and at this time of night, too. Come inside and get warm. The door opened, and they saw a large badger wearing a bathrobe and holding a candle. Mole and Rat almost fell down in their hurry to get inside the warm house.
The Badger looked kindly at the two smaller animals. He patted their heads. "This isn't the kind of night for little animals like you to be out," he said. "Come into the kitchen. There's a fire there, and many things to eat for dinner." This sounded like a very good idea to Mole and Rat. Badger's house was very large. It had many long passages. There were strong wooden doors in the passages. Mole wondered how many rooms were in Badger's house. Badger's kitchen was large and warm. There was a long table with benches. A lot of delicious-looking food was on top of the tables. There was a large fire in the fireplace. It was the sort of place where friends could spend time together very comfortably. First, Badger gave Mole and Rat some warm, dry clothes. Then he washed the cut on Mole's leg with warm water. Then, when the food was all ready, he told Mole and Rat to sit down at the table. How hungry they were! It was a very long time before anyone began to talk. They were too busy eating. When they were finally finished, Mole and Rat told the story of what happened that day. Badger listened very carefully to them. He never said, "I told you so," or "You should have done this," or things like that. Mole decided that Badger was one of the nicest animals he had ever met, except for Rat, of course. After they had eaten, the three animals went and sat around the fire. It was a wonderful feeling to be warm and comfortable and not hungry. After they had talked about general kinds of things, Badger said, "Now then, tell me what's going on in your part of the world. How is Toad these days?" "Oh, it's just terrible," said Rat sadly. "You remember that he bought a car? Well, he's a terrible driver. He's always having accidents. In fact, he keeps on buying more cars because he's always ruining the one he's got. If he would only let someone drive him around who knows how to drive, he would be all right. But, of course, he's so vain. He thinks he's the best driver in the world. The situation is ridiculous." "How many has he had?" asked the Badger seriously. "How many accidents has he had, or how many cars?" said Rat. "Well, this is the 7th car, if you can believe it." "He's been in the hospital 3 times now. I can't imagine how much money he's had to pay," said Mole sadly. "We all know that Toad is rich, but he's not a millionaire," said Rat. "I'm afraid he's going to be killed driving one of those cars. He could lose all his money or go to jail. He's always getting driving tickets. You know, Toad doesn't care about laws. Badger, we're his friends. Do you think we ought to do something?" The Badger thought about the problem for a few minutes. "Now listen here," he said very firmly. "You know, of course, that I can't do anything about Toad now." Mole and Rat understood. The laws of nature say that in winter animals do not work hard. The winter is a time for rest and sleep, while the spring, summer, and autumn are the time for work and play. This was why Badger, Mole, and Rat couldn't help Toad immediately. "Well then, soon it will be almost springtime. I will be ready to be awake and doing things. Then, Rat, you and me and our friend the Mole here will go to work. We'll speak to Toad very seriously. We'll stop him from driving any more cars. We'll make him be a nice, reasonable Toad. Rat, you're asleep." "No, I'm not," said the Rat, waking up suddenly. He had fallen asleep in his chair. The Mole laughed. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since dinner ended," he said. Mole himself felt very awake. This is because it was natural for Mole to live under the ground, just like Badger. Before Mole had met Rat, he had been an underground animal, and so he felt very comfortable in Badger's house. "Well, it's time for us all to go to bed," said the Badger. He took Mole and Rat to a large room. The room was filled with the Badger's supply of winter foods.
There were apples, nuts, vegetables, and jars of honey in large piles. But there were 2 comfortable beds in the corner with clean, soft sheets. "Don't worry about getting up early. We'll have breakfast any time you like," said the kind badger. The 2 tired animals got into bed and were asleep as soon as their heads touched the pillows. In the morning, Mole and Rat woke up very late. When they woke up, they went into the kitchen. There they found 2 young animals called hedgehogs sitting at the table and eating breakfast. When the hedgehogs saw Mole and Rat, they jumped up and bowed to them politely. Sit down and finish your breakfast," said the Rat cheerfully. "Now, where have you young children come from? Did you get lost in the snow?" "Yes, sir," said one of the hedgehogs. "My little brother Billy and I were going to school, but we got lost in the snow. Then Billy got frightened and cried. But then we found Mr. Badger's house. He was very kind to us." "I understand," said the Rat. He began to cook some bacon, while the Mole fried some eggs. "What is the weather like today?" "Oh, it's terrible, sir," said one of the little hedgehogs. "The snow is very deep. I don't think you'll be able to leave today." "Where's Mr. Badger?" asked the Mole.
"Mr. Badger went into his room, sir. He told us he was very busy, and he did not want to be disturbed for any reason," replied the hedgehog.
Mole and Rat understood. An animal is very, very busy for 1/2 of the year and very sleepy for the other half. So Badger was busy sleeping. Suddenly the doorbell rang loudly. The Rat was eating some bread and butter. He sent Billy the hedgehog to see who it was. After a moment the Otter came running into the kitchen. He immediately threw his arms around Rat with a happy shout. "Get off me!" cried the Rat. His mouth was full of bread.
"I thought I would find you 2 here," said the Otter happily. "All the river animals were very worried about both of you. They were very upset this morning. Rat and Mole have been gone all night. Something terrible must have happened," they said. "Well, I knew that when animals have problems they go to Badger. So I went into the wild forest. I saw a rabbit sitting by a tree. The silly animal was so scared of me that I had to hit him several times before he would talk. The rabbit said he had seen Mole in the woods last night. All the rabbits were talking about it. Mole was in great danger because they were out hunting for him. Well,
"Why didn't you rabbits do something to help him?"
I said. "You might be stupid, but there are lots of you."
"Do something? Us rabbits?" was all he said.
"What a stupid animal. I left him sitting there and came here, and here you are."
"But weren't you afraid to walk around in the wild forest?" asked Mole. He remembered how terrible yesterday had been. The Otter laughed. Mole saw his strong, sharp white teeth.
"Oh, no," he said. "I'd make them afraid if I ran into any of them. No one bothers me in the wild forest. Now, Mole, be a good little mole and fry me some ham. I've got a lot to talk to Rat about. I haven't seen him in a long time."
So the Mole fried some ham, and they all sat down to eat it. Soon the Badger appeared in the kitchen. He greeted everyone very kindly. "It's almost lunchtime," he said to the Otter. "You'd better stay here and eat with us. You must be hungry on this cold morning."
"Oh, yes," said the Otter.
The Badger sent someone to take the little hedgehogs back to their home. After a while, the other animals sat down to eat lunch. Mole saw that he was sitting next to the Badger. The Otter and Rat were having a very long conversation about the river, so Mole and Badger began to talk. They discovered that they were very much alike, because they lived underground. Mole told Badger how much he liked his house. "Living underground is the best, that's what I think," said the Mole. "You always know exactly where you are, and nothing bad can happen to you. Things might change in the outside, but underground they are always the same. No wind, snow, or storms can harm you." The Badger smiled at him. "That's exactly what I always say. Here, after we finish eating, I'll show you the rest of my house. I know you're the kind of animal who will appreciate it." After lunch, the Rat and Otter went to sit by the fire. Badger lit a candle and told Mole to follow him. The Badger's house was the most amazing house Mole had ever seen. It was much, much bigger than Toad's house, but it was under the ground. There were many passages, tunnels, and doors. The doors led to many large rooms. "Badger," Mole said finally, "how did you ever build this house? It's astonishing. It must have taken you years and years." "It would have been amazing," said the Badger, "if I had built it. But I didn't build it. All I did was clean out the passages and rooms. There are many more rooms and passages that we don't see. I don't even know how many rooms there are." Mole did not know what to say. "Let me tell you some history," said the Badger. "Many hundreds of years ago, before the wild forest existed, there was a great city of humans who lived under the ground. They built this place. Really, this is not a house, it is an underground city." "What happened to the humans?" asked Mole. "Who knows? Humans come, they stay for a while, and then they move somewhere else. That is their custom. But we animals remain. There were badgers living here long before the people, and now there are badgers here again. We badgers are very patient animals, you see. We may leave for a while, but we always come back to our underground home." Badger's words gave Mole a lot to think about. He remembered his own little home under the ground. He hadn't seen it for a long time. When Badger and Mole returned to the kitchen, they saw that Rat was very eager to go home to the river. The underground made him uncomfortable. He liked fresh air and sunshine. "Relax, Rat," said Badger. "I'll show you a shortcut through the wild forest, and you'll be home in no time." The Badger took Mole, Rat, and Otter through a very long underground passage. It seemed that they walked for a very long time. However, finally they arrived at a part of the passage that was just under the ground. The passage led out into the open air. Mole could see the sunshine. Quickly, the Badger let them out of the passage and said goodbye. The three animals thanked Badger for his kindness. Now the Otter led them through the rest of the wild forest. The Otter was almost as powerful an animal as the Badger, so Mole and Rat felt safe with him. Finally, they reached the forest's end. They were looking at the green fields, and the river was nearby. All of the animals were very happy to be going home, away from the dark forest. Happily, the animals hurried toward the river back to Rat's house. As he ran, the Mole realized that he was really a field animal. He might live under the ground like Badger, but he also liked the little gardens and the fresh air and the sunshine. The wild forest was not his kind of place. Chapter 5. Home Sweet Home. It was almost Christmas time. The sheep that lived in the fields were outside eating hay. It was very cold, so they stood close together for warmth. Mole and Rat were walking across the field, laughing and talking. It was a cold but sunny day. Mole and Rat were returning home from an exploring trip with Otter. All day they had explored parts of the river. Now they were returning home to have dinner, and they still had a long distance to travel. "It looks as if we were near a village," said Mole. Generally, animals try to stay away from humans, so Mole was a little worried about seeing people.
"Oh, don't worry about the people," said the rat. "At this time of year, all the men, women, and children are inside their houses. No one will see us as we pass by."
They continued to make the long walk home. Each animal was thinking his own thoughts, and they weren't talking much. Mole was thinking about dinner and how nice it would be to sit by a fire. Rat was walking ahead of Mole, staring at the road ahead of him. Suddenly, Mole stopped walking. He looked very surprised, but Rat didn't notice. Mole had suddenly realized that his old house was nearby. It was very close. All Mole had to do was find it. All of a sudden, he deeply wanted to see his old home again. Mole's house was small and not as nice as his friends' houses, but it was his, and he wanted to see it. "Rat," Mole called excitedly. "Come back! Rat, wait a minute!"
"Oh, come on, Mole,"
called the rat cheerfully. He didn't stop walking.
"We've got a long way to go before we get home."
"Rat, you don't understand. It's my home, my old home. It's nearby, and I really want to see it again. Please come back." But Rat was too far ahead. He could not hear what his friend was saying. Rat looked at the sky and decided that it was going to snow.
"Mole, we'll come back and look for it tomorrow, whatever it is. We shouldn't stop now. It's late, and I think it's going to snow. We really have to get home. Now hurry up and come here. I need your help."
Mole stood there and suddenly felt terribly sad. He missed his old home, but even now he was very loyal to Rat. So, very sadly, he ran to catch up with his friend. The rat didn't notice how unhappy Mole was. He talked cheerfully about the big fire they would build at home, and the large dinner they would eat. Mole didn't say anything. Finally the rat said kindly,
"Why, Mole, you seem very tired. You're not talking, and you're walking so slowly. We'll sit down here for a moment and rest. We're almost home, and it hasn't snowed yet."
They sat down for a minute. Mole felt himself wanting to cry. He missed his old home so much. Finally, he couldn't help it. The tears ran down his face, and he cried and cried. Rat didn't say anything for a little while. Finally he said very gently,
"What is it, Mole? What is the matter? Tell me your trouble, and I'll see what I can do to help."
"Oh, Rat," cried Mole, "I know it's a small, poor little house, not like yours or Toad's, but when I realized we were near my house, all the memories came back to me, and I wanted to see it. But when you wouldn't come back, Rat, I had to leave it, and it broke my heart. We might have gone and had just one look at it, but you wouldn't turn back, Rat." And he began to cry again. The rat stood there and looked serious and sad.
"I understand now. Oh, dear, how selfish I have been. How terrible of me."
After a moment, Rat said,
"Well, come on then, Mole. It's getting late. We've got to hurry."
But he did not walk towards the river. He began to walk back the way they had come. "Rat, where are you going?" cried Mole.
"We're going to find your house, of course," said Rat. "So you'd better come along. It will take some time to find, and only you know the way."
"Oh, come back, Rat," cried Mole. He got up and hurried after his friend. "It's late and dark. My house is too far from here, and I never meant to tell you how I was feeling. It's all right, really," he said. "Besides, what about your house by the river and your dinner?"
"Forget about my house and dinner too," said the rat cheerfully. "I'm going to find your nice old house if I have to stay out all night. Now, no more talking. If we want to find it, we have to concentrate."
So Mole and Rat went back the way they had come. It wasn't long before Mole remembered the way to his house. He searched around on the ground and used all his senses to find the way. The Rat followed him. He was very interested and excited to see Mole's house. Suddenly, Mole saw a small hole in the ground. It was almost hidden by grass. It was the underground path that led to his house. He and Rat crawled into the passage. It seemed like a long time before they reached the end of the passage. Finally, they saw a door with a sign on it that said, "Mole End." This was Mole's house. Next to the door there was a little bench and some garden statues. Mole had made himself an underground garden with a little fish pond. It was a very nice-looking place. Mole smiled happily at the sight of all these familiar things. When he opened the door, however, he began to feel sad again. His house was so dirty, dark and dusty. He had not been there for a long time. He sat down in a chair and put his face in his paws. "Oh, Rat, why did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this? You could be sitting by your nice, warm fire by now." The Rat wasn't listening. He was walking around the house. "What a wonderful house this is," he said. "You did an excellent job of building it, Mole. We'll have a wonderful night here. The first thing to do is build a nice fire in the fireplace. I'll go and get the wood. Why don't you clean things up a little?" Mole suddenly felt much better. While Rat made a fire, Mole swept the floors and cleaned the house. When the fire was ready, Rat told Mole to come and get warm. Suddenly, Mole had another upsetting thought. "Rat," he cried, "you poor hungry animal. I don't have anything to give you for dinner, not even a crumb." "Oh, don't be silly," said the Rat. "There's lots of food. I saw a can of fish in the kitchen. I'm sure there are other things, too. Now, come with me and look." Besides the can of fish, they found a sausage and some biscuits. "This will be an excellent meal," said the Rat as they sat down. "I know lots of animals who would love to be eating this." "But we don't have any bread," said the Mole sadly. "No butter either." "I'm sure there's lots more food in the cellar," interrupted the Rat. "I'll go and see." He came back a few minutes later with 2 bottles of beer. "Really, Mole, you are ridiculous. There's lots of beer in the cellar. And this house is the nicest little house I was ever in. Where did you get those nice pictures on the wall? And the tables and chairs? Tell me all about it." Rat found forks, knives, and plates for their meal. Mole told Rat all about his house. His story went on for so long that the Rat became extremely hungry. They were finally ready to sit down to dinner when Mole's doorbell rang. They heard voices outside and the sound of small feet. "Who do you think that is?" asked Rat. "It's the field mice," said Mole. "At this time of year, they go to everybody's houses and sing songs. I used to give the mice hot drinks and dinner, too, when I could afford it." "Let's go and see," said the Rat, running to the door. Mole opened the door. They saw 8 or 9 young mice dressed in little red coats. For a moment, a little mice stood there and looked shy. Then an adult mouse said, "1, 2, 3, and the mice began to sing a Christmas song. After it was over, everyone clapped. The Rat said, "Now then, boys, come in and have something hot to eat and drink." "Yes, come in, field mice," said the Mole. "This is just like old times. Shut the door after you and sit down by the fire." "Oh, no, Rat," he said suddenly. "We don't have anything to give them. What are we doing?" "Don't worry about that," said the Rat. He called to one of the field mice. "Hello there.
Are your stores open at this time?" "Yes, sir," said the mouse. "Well, then, take this basket and go and buy us some things." Rat gave the mouse a rather long list of foods he wanted. Then he gave the mouse some money and a large basket. Mole wondered what the mouse would bring back. Meanwhile, the rest of the mice were sitting by the warm fire. Mole could not think of interesting things to talk to them about. So he asked the mice the names of all their parents and brothers and sisters. The rat was examining the bottles of beer in Mole's cellar. "Intelligent Mole, wonderful Mole, you've got the best kind of beer right here. Now, get the glasses ready while I open the bottles." Everyone sat around the fire for a while and sipped beer and hot apple juice. Soon the field mouse came back with all the food. Following Rat's directions, everyone was busy setting the table. Finally, Mole went to sit at the table with his friends. He felt that he was in a happy dream. As they ate, they talked about old times. The field mice told Mole all the news of the neighborhood. Mole had many questions for them. Rat didn't say much. He was busy making sure that each animal had what he wanted. Mole did not worry about anything. Finally, the field mice left. They were very grateful, warm, and happy. Mole and Rat had one last drink by the fire, and then Rat said, "Mole, old friend, I'm ready for sleep. I can't tell you how tired I am. I'll just climb into this little bed here." In a minute, the rat was asleep. As Mole lay in his own bed by the fire, he looked around his house happily. Mole felt very happy and at home. This was what his good friend Rat wanted. It was true that Mole didn't want to leave his new life with Rat. The fresh air, the river, and the sunshine were very exciting. He wanted to have more adventures. But it was very nice to know that his little home would be waiting for him whenever he wanted it. Chapter 6. More about Toad. It was a beautiful day in early summer. The mole and the rat had been up since dawn. They had been very busy with Rat's boat. They were painting it and cleaning it. Now they were eating a late breakfast in the kitchen and discussing what they were going to do that day. Suddenly the doorbell rang. "Oh dear," said the rat. "Mole, I haven't finished eating yet. Would you go and see who it is?" After a minute, Mole came running into the kitchen. He looked very surprised. He said, "Mr. Badger is here." It was a very strange and wonderful thing that Badger would come to see them. Badger didn't go to his friends' houses very often. If they wanted to find him, they had to catch him walking around. Badger walked into the room looking very serious. The rat was so surprised. He let his spoon fall on the table and sat there with an open mouth. "The hour has arrived," the badger said loudly. "What hour?" asked the rat, looking at the clock. "Whose hour, you should say. It's time for us to rescue Toad," said the badger. "It is summer now. We are all awake and ready for anything. It's time for us to do something about Toad and his terrible cars. We must save Toad from himself." "I remember now. We'll teach him to be a reasonable Toad," cried the mole happily. The badger sat down in a chair. "This morning I heard some very disturbing news," he said. "Toad has bought himself another large and extremely powerful car. I'm sure that at this minute he is busy dressing himself in those awful driving clothes. Normally he's a good-looking Toad, but those clothes make him look unnatural. He looks like a human when he's driving the car. We've got to do something before it's too late. You two animals will come with me to Toad Hall right now." "Badger, you're absolutely right," cried the rat. He stood up. "Now is the time. We'll rescue the poor unhappy Toad. He'll be the best Toad ever. by the time we're finished with him."
Immediately the three animals walked to Toad Hall. Badger led the way. When they reached Toad's house, the first thing they saw was a shiny new car sitting outside. It was painted bright red. This was Toad's favorite color. Toad was wearing his driving clothes. He was just about to get into the car when he saw his friends. "Hello, friends," he cried. "You're just in time to come with me on a nice. His voice faded when he saw the serious faces of his friends. "Take him inside," said the Badger to Mole and Rat. Toad struggled and protested. When they were all inside the house, Badger said firmly to Toad, "Now, take those ridiculous clothes off, please." "I won't," said Toad loudly. "What is the meaning of this? I demand an explanation." "All right, then. Take the clothes off him, Mole and Rat." Mole and Rat had to hold Toad down and take his driving clothes off. Toad kicked and shouted all the while. When all the clothes were finally off, they got Toad back on his feet again. Now he looked like an ordinary Toad instead of a car driver. Now he didn't seem so angry. He even laughed a little, as if he understood the situation. "Now then, Toad," said Badger, "you knew this would happen. We are giving you lots of warnings about those cars. But you haven't paid attention to us. You've continued to waste all the money your father left you. You're giving the rest of us animals a bad reputation in this area. The driving, the car accidents, and the fights with the police must stop. I know that your independence is important, but we can't let you hurt yourself any more. Now, you are a good Toad in many ways, so I'll try talking to you once more. Come with me into the living room. I have to tell you some very serious facts about yourself. We'll see if you are the same Toad when you come out." Badger took Toad by the arm, went into the living room, and closed the door. "Oh dear," said Rat. "That's no good. Talking to Toad won't do anything. Toad will say anything to get what he wants." Mole and Rat sat down in some comfortable chairs and waited. They heard Badger's slow, deep voice talking. Soon they heard Toad crying. Toad really was a kind animal with a good heart. Often he would agree with others for a little while. After about 45 minutes, the door opened. Badger and Toad came out. Toad certainly did look different. He looked tired and very upset. "Sit down there, Toad," said the Badger very gently. "My friends, I am happy to tell you that Toad has realized his mistakes. He is very sorry for all the trouble he has caused. He has promised to give up cars forever." "That's very good news," said Mole. However, Rat wasn't so sure. He stared at Toad closely. He knew Toad very well. Although Toad looked very sad, Rat thought he might be pretending. Was Toad serious? "There is only one thing more to be done," said Badger. "Toad, I would like you to tell our friends what you told me in the living room. First, are you sorry for what you have done? You see what a mistake it was to buy a car?" There was a long, long silence. Toad looked around at each of his friends while they waited silently. At last Toad spoke. "No," he said with courage, "I'm not sorry. And it wasn't a mistake at all. It was simply wonderful." "What?" cried the Badger. "You terrible little animal! 5 minutes ago you told me that—" "Oh, I would have said anything in that room," said Toad. "When I'm alone with you, Badger, you can make me believe anything. But I've been thinking about it. I've discovered that I am not sorry for anything I've done. So it would be useless to say that I am." "Then you won't promise never to drive a car again?" asked the Badger. "That's right," said Toad. "But I do promise that I will get into the next car I see." All right, then, said Badger seriously. I was afraid of this. Well, Toad, if we can't persuade you by talking, then we will have to use force. You've often asked Mole, Rat, and I to come and stay with you here at Toad Hall. Well, you are getting your wish. We are going to stay here and watch you until we have persuaded you. Mole and Rat, carry him upstairs and lock him in his room. So Mole and Rat carried the kicking and shouting Toad up to his room.
It's for your own good, Toad, said Rat gently. Think how much fun we'll have when you've changed your mind about cars.
We'll take care of everything for you until you're better, Toad, said Mole. We'll make sure your money is safe.
No more of those fights with the police, Toad, said the Rat as they pushed Toad into his room.
And no more visits to the hospital, said Mole as he locked the door. They went down the stairs. They could hear Toad was shouting at them in his room. Then the three animals discussed the problem. It's going to be a difficult situation, said Badger. We'll have to stay here and watch him very carefully. He can't be left alone for a minute. We'll have to take turns watching him until he decides to be reasonable. Each night Mole, Rat, and Badger took turns sleeping in Toad's room. They also took turns spending part of the day with him. At first, Toad was very unpleasant to be around because he was so upset. He wouldn't speak to any of his friends. He would sit in a chair and stare straight ahead. Sometimes he would even pretend to be driving a car. But after a while, Toad's anger seemed to disappear. However, he became quiet and unhappy. Mole, Rat, and Badger tried to think of things to interest him, but it did no good. They were all very worried. One morning it was Rat's turn to spend time with Toad. Badger had spent the night with him. Now Badger wanted to go for a long walk in the woods and visit his house. Toad's still in bed, Badger said to Rat. He won't talk very much. When I tried to talk to him, all he would say is, "Oh, don't worry about me. I'm sure I'll feel better someday, dear Badger. It's nothing," and things like that. I don't know what he's talking about. Now, Rat, you be careful. When Toad acts like this, he just might be trying to trick you. Toad is a very good actor. I know him very well. Well, time to go. The Badger left the house, and Rat went in to see his friend. He found Toad lying in bed with his eyes closed.
"Good morning, Toad," he said cheerfully. "How are you today?"
Toad didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then Rat heard his weak voice. "Thank you very much, Rat. It's so nice of you to ask how I am. But first, how are you and our friend the Mole?"
"We're all right," said the Rat. "Mole and Badger are going out today. They'll be gone till lunchtime, so you and I will spend the day together. I'll do my best to keep you happy. Now, be a good Toad and get out of bed. Don't lie in bed on a nice day like this."
"Dear kind Rat," whispered Toad, "you don't understand my condition. I won't be getting out of bed today. Maybe not ever again. But don't worry about me. I hate to make trouble for my friends. I don't think I will be a problem for you much longer."
"Well, I hope not," said Rat cheerfully. "You've been lots of trouble so far. I'm glad to hear it's going to stop. It's a beautiful summer. All the other animals are outside enjoying themselves. We want to help you, Toad, but you are making us miss all the fun."
"I know," said Toad sadly. "You are tired of me. I must not ask you to do anything more for me. I am too much trouble, I know."
"Well, you know that we would do anything for you, if only you'd be a reasonable animal," said Rat.
"Then, dear Rat, could I ask you to do one small thing? It might be the last thing I ever ask you," whispered Toad. "Would you go to the village and find me a doctor? It might already be too late."
"Why, what do you want a doctor for?" asked Rat.
He stepped closer to the bed and examined Toad. He was lying there very still.
"Haven't you noticed my illness?" said Toad. "But no noticing things is too much trouble. Maybe tomorrow you might say, 'Oh, if only I had noticed. If only I had done something sooner.' Don't worry. Forget that I asked you."
But Rat was really beginning to be worried about Toad.
"Listen here, Toad. I'll get you a doctor if you really think you need one. But you can't be as sick as that. Let's talk about something else."
"Dear friend, I'm afraid that talking will not help me any more," said Toad. "I don't think the doctors can help me either, but we must try. Oh, when you are in the village, could you also get a lawyer? I think I will have to write my will very quickly."
"A lawyer? Oh, no, he must be really sick. Maybe he'll die,"
said Rat to himself as he ran out of the bedroom. He didn't forget to lock the door behind him, however. When the Rat was outside, he stopped to think for a moment.
"It's best to be safe," he thought. "Sometimes Toad thinks he is sick when he isn't, but I've never heard him ask for a lawyer. If there's nothing the matter, the doctor will tell him so. But if he really is sick, I'd better hurry."
So the Rat ran off to the village. As soon as the Rat had left the bedroom, Toad had jumped out of bed. He watched Rat run off to the village. Toad laughed loudly. Then he dressed in his best clothes. He put lots of money in his pockets. Then he tied all the bed sheets together to make a kind of rope. He tied one end of the rope to the bedpost and then threw the rope out of the window. Carefully he climbed down the rope to the ground. He was outside and free. Quickly he walked down the road in the opposite direction from the Rat. He was whistling happily. Poor Rat had an unhappy time when Badger and Mole found out that Toad had escaped. The Badger did not understand why Rat had believed Toad's story. Even Mole, who was very loyal to Rat, said gently, "You've been a bit silly this time, Rat. Even I wouldn't have believed him."
"But he did it awfully well," said the Rat sadly.
"Rat, what did I tell you? Never believe anything Toad says when he acts like that. It means he's out to trick you, or he wants something," said Badger. "But there is no good in talking about it. He's escaped. He will be so proud of what he's done. Who knows what he'll do now? Fortunately for us, we are free now. We don't have to waste any more of our summer watching him. But we should continue to sleep at Toad Hall for a while longer. The police might bring Toad back here at any moment." The Badger said these wise words to his friends, but he did not know the future, or how much time would pass before they saw Toad again. Meanwhile, a very happy Toad walked along the road. He was very pleased with himself. He thought he was extremely smart for escaping. "I was wonderful," he said to himself. "Badger, Mole, and Rat were too strong for me, but I was too smart for them. Poor old Rat. I'm sure Badger will be angry at him. Rat has very good qualities, but not much intelligence. I must try to guide him in the future." As he walked to the nearest town, Toad continued to talk to himself in this vain way. Soon Toad reached the town. He saw a restaurant called the Red Lion. He was very hungry after his long walk. He entered and asked for the restaurant's most delicious lunch. He had been eating for a while when he heard a familiar sound. It was the sound of a car. Toad looked out the window and saw a beautiful, shiny car next to the restaurant. In a few moments the car's owners came into the restaurant and sat down to eat. Toad's heart was beating very fast. He was so excited. He listened to the car's owners talk for a while. They were talking about how fast their car was and how well it ran. Finally, Toad couldn't sit there any longer. "I'll just go and look at it," he thought. He left the restaurant very quietly. The car stood next to the restaurant. No one was around. Toad walked around the car. He looked at it carefully. After a moment he said, "I wonder if this kind of car starts easily." The next second, Toad was in the driver's seat of the car. He didn't know how it had happened. He grabbed the wheel. He saw the car key and turned it. The engine started. Toad didn't stop to think that he was stealing another person's car. When he heard the sound of the engine, Toad forgot about everything else. He could only think how much he loved cars. Toad turned the wheel and drove the car away from the restaurant. He drove faster and faster. He didn't care what would happen. He didn't care where he was going. He was the old Toad again, Toad the Great. But his happiness didn't last. The policemen caught him about 20 miles away. "Well, this is not a very simple problem," said the policeman. "This Toad is guilty of stealing another person's car. He is also guilty of driving too fast. Also, he was rude to the country police. Now, Mr. Clerk, will you please answer this question? How long will this Toad stay in jail for these crimes?" The clerk thought for a minute. "Well, sir, he must stay in jail for 20 years. "Excellent," said the policeman. Then he looked at Toad. Toad was sitting in a chair at the police station. "Did you hear that, you bad little Toad? You're going to jail for the next 20 years. Toad shouted and screamed. He even prayed, but it did not help. His hands were tied in chains. Then the policeman took Toad outside. Men, women, and children saw him and laughed. The policeman took Toad away. The jail was inside an old, dark, ugly castle. Toad was taken to this jail and thrown inside. The door slammed and the key turned in the lock. So Toad was a prisoner inside the strongest castle in all of England. He would not see the sun for 20 years. Chapter 7. The Spirit of Nature. It was a very hot evening. A few weeks later, Mole lay on the grass next to the river. He was waiting for Rat to come home. Mole had spent the day with some friends, and Rat had gone to visit Otter. It was dark, and Rat hadn't returned. He was probably staying up late talking to Otter. It was still too hot to go inside. Mole had decided to wait for his friend by the river. Soon he heard Rat coming. "Oh, it's so much cooler next to the water," he said. He sat down and stared at the water. He was quiet. He seemed to be thinking about something. "Did you eat dinner with Otter and his family?" asked Mole after a few moments. "Oh, of course," said Rat. "They wouldn't let me leave without eating. You know how kind Otter and his family are, and we had a very nice time. However, I felt terrible. The family is very worried and unhappy, but they don't want me to know it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in serious trouble. Otter's son Portly is missing again." "What? That little animal," said Mole. "He's always leaving home to have adventures by himself. He gets lost for a few days, but he always returns home. And every animal around here knows him and likes him. I'm sure he's safe. You and I have seen Portly when he's lost. He was many miles from home, but he wasn't scared." "Yes, but this time it's more serious," said the Rat. "Portly has been gone for many days now. The otters have looked everywhere for him. He has disappeared. Otter is afraid. He doesn't want to frighten his family too much, but when I left their house, Otter said he would come with me. Then he and I had a private talk. He is afraid for his son. Portly hasn't learned to swim yet, you see, and humans will catch and kill otters when they get the chance."
Otter told me he is going to spend the night watching by the river. There is a place Portly liked to play. Otter hopes Portly will go there if he is lost."
Mole and Rat sat there quietly for a while. They were thinking of poor Otter, waiting for his little son to come home. How lonely and worried he must be. After a while, Rat said,
"Well, I guess it's time for bed."
But he didn't move. "Rat," said Mole slowly, "I can't go in and go to sleep now. I feel like I've got to do something to help Otter. Maybe we can't help, but we can try. What do you think? We'll get the boat out and row it up the river. The moon will rise in an hour, and then we'll search for Portly as hard as we can. Who knows, we may find some clue or hear some news about him."
"That's just what I was thinking," said Rat. "I'm not tired, and it's not too many hours until sunrise."
Mole and Rat got their boat out and began to travel up the river. It was a clear, quiet night. There were many stars in the sky. There were many animals outside. They were talking to each other and working together. Soon the large silver moon rose in the sky. The two friends traveled up the river for a little while, and then began to search in the bushes, trees, holes, and tunnels for little Portly the otter. They searched for some time, then traveled up the river some more. Then they searched again. They continued in this way for many hours until the moon set in the sky. After the moon had set, the sky grew lighter. The grass and trees became easier to see. A bird sang a song, and then was quiet. A gentle wind blew through the trees. Rat was sitting in the front of the boat, while Mole was rowing. Suddenly Rat stood up. He was listening to something very carefully, but Mole could not hear it. After a few moments, Rat sat down again. Mole looked at him curiously.
"It's gone,"
cried Rat softly.
"I heard some music. It was so beautiful, strange, and new. If it had to end so soon, then I wish I had never heard it. Now, nothing in life seems good. I only want to hear that beautiful music again and listen to it forever. Wait, now I hear it again." Rat listened carefully. He had an astonished look on his face. He looked happier than Mole had ever seen him. "Now the music is getting softer. I can't hear it any more," he said after a few moments. "Oh, Mole, if only you could hear this music, how beautiful it is. It is clear, joyful, and sweet. It is the sound of a flute. I think that the person who plays the flute is calling us. Row on, Mole, we must find him."
Mole was amazed. "All right," he said. "As for me, I hear nothing. I only hear the wind moving through the trees." Rat did not answer him. He was busy listening to the mysterious music. He was trembling with joy. Quietly Mole rowed the boat up the river. They were very close to the grass now. Then Rat suddenly said, "Now the music is nearer. Do you hear it? Oh, you do hear it, Mole." And Mole did hear the mysterious, beautiful music. He stood very still and listened. It was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. It was like music from heaven. He saw tears of joy on Rat's cheeks. For a minute the two animals did not move. Then Mole continued to row the boat. Rat was right. Someone or something was calling them. The beautiful music was leading them somewhere. They did not know where. No birds sang, and there was no wind. Except for the wonderful music, everything was still and quiet. It seemed to Rat and Mole that the world had never been so beautiful. The grass was fresh and green. The flowers smelled sweeter than before. All the colors of the forest were bright and clear. Soon they saw a very small island in the middle of the river. The island was surrounded by trees. Both the animals suddenly knew that they had to go to the island. They needed to see what was behind all those trees. They didn't understand why. They thought they were answering the call of the mysterious music. In a few moments they had arrived at the island. Without speaking, Mole and Rat got out of their boat. They tied it to a tree by the water. They walked slowly through the trees. Then they saw that they were in a beautiful space filled with grass and flowers. This space was surrounded by cherry, apple, and other fruit trees. "Here is the place," said the rat. "It is a holy place. We will surely find him here." Mole didn't need to ask who he was. Suddenly he felt a strange, amazing feeling in his heart. He felt both incredibly happy and afraid. He could not lift his head to see what stood in front of him, but he could see that there was a bright, golden light shining all around him. He felt that someone was very near, that someone was not from this earth. Slowly Mole turned to look at Rat. He saw that Rat was trembling. The golden light grew brighter. Everything was silent. Perhaps Mole would have never raised his head, but something was commanding him. Even if it meant he would die that moment, he had to obey. Mole raised his head and looked straight ahead. He looked into the eyes of a great spirit. It was the spirit of nature. The spirit of nature was the friend and helper of all animals. The spirit had a flute in his hand. He had a long beard, curly hair, and kind eyes. In the spirit's large arms was the lost little otter, Portly. Portly was sleeping just like a baby. Somehow Mole was able to say, "Rat, are you afraid?" "Afraid?" whispered Rat. Rat's eyes were shining with love. "Of him? And yet somehow, oh, Mole, I am afraid." Then the two animals bowed to the great spirit. At that moment the sun began to rise. The sun's light shone brightly into Mole and Rat's eyes. They could not see for a moment. When they looked again, they saw that the spirit was gone. The air was filled with the sounds of birds singing. The birds were welcoming the new day. Mole and Rat stared at each other and didn't say anything. They understood the meaning of what they had seen. But now the spirit was gone, and they would never see him again. They suddenly felt extremely sad and lonely. However, a cool wind suddenly touched their skins. The wind was magic. The spirit of nature created it. When the spirit of nature helps animals in trouble, he is always careful to make them forget that they have seen him. Otherwise, the amazing memory might make them bored with their ordinary life. Then they would be unhappy. Mole and Rat felt this magic wind on their faces. They immediately forgot that they had seen the spirit. Mole rubbed his eyes. "What were you just saying, Rat?" he asked. "I think I was saying that we might find Otter's son here," said Rat slowly. Suddenly he shouted, "And there he is! It's little Portly!" He ran towards the baby otter. The baby was sleeping on the ground. But Mole stood still for a moment. He felt as if he had just woken up from a beautiful dream, but he couldn't remember it at all. He stood there for a minute, thinking deeply. Then he sighed sadly and joined Rat. Portly the otter woke up. He was very happy to see his father's friends. Often they had played with him at home, but soon Portly began to run around the island. He seemed to be looking for someone. He seemed very upset and finally began to cry. Mole ran to comfort him. Rat was looking at the ground. There were some large footprints there.
I think some large animal has been here, Rat said slowly.
He tried to think about it. Had he seen a large animal? It seemed to Rat that he had seen something here, something astonishing. What was it? He couldn't remember. "Come on, Rat," said Mole. "Think of poor Otter waiting by the river. We've got to take Portly home." When little Portly found out that he was going to take a ride in Rat's boat, he forgot about being sad. The three animals got into their boat and traveled down the river again. It was a beautiful morning. Soon they saw the path that led to Otter's home. They pulled up the boat close to the grass. Then they took Portly out of the boat and said, "Now off you go, little Portly. Go home to your family." They watched as the little otter ran quickly along the path. He was making little sounds in his otter language. These sounds meant, "Father, Father, where are you? I'm home." Then they saw Otter running down the path towards his son. They continued to row down the river. Mole said, "Rat, I feel terribly tired. We often stay out all night, but for some reason I can't keep my eyes open. I feel as if we've just had some great and exciting adventure, but we haven't. We only went out to search for Portly, and we found him."
"I feel just the same way," said Rat. "I'm exhausted. I wonder why we both feel this way."
They were quiet for a while, enjoying the warm sunshine. After a while, Rat turned to Mole and said,
"Mole, this is the most beautiful day. Do you hear the wind moving through the grass? It's just like music."
"It is, isn't it? I almost believe that I hear someone singing." "What do you think the words are?" asked Mole.
"I hear it too. Let me try to listen," said the Rat. After a moment he said, "It seems to be a song about forgetting your troubles and being happy."
"I don't understand. What does that mean?" asked Mole. But Rat had already fallen asleep. He had a peaceful smile on his face. Chapter 8. Toad's Great Escape. When Toad realized that he was a prisoner in this terrible jail, he lay down on the floor and cried for a long time. He wouldn't see the sunlight for 20 years. He felt awful. "How stupid and foolish I was," he said. "Now the popular and handsome Toad will have to stay in this prison forever. Everyone will forget about me. I was wrong to steal that car. Oh, if only I had listened to Rat, Mole, and the wise old Badger." Toad talked to himself in this way for a few weeks. He didn't sleep and hardly ate anything. Only one man worked at this jail. He brought the prisoners their food and drink. This man had a daughter. She helped her father with his work. This girl was very kind, and she loved animals. She kept a bird in a cage and some other small pets. One day she said to her father,
"Father, I feel so sorry for that poor Toad. He's so unhappy, and he's getting so thin. Won't you let me go and talk to him?"
The jailer didn't like Toad very much because he was so rich. He told his daughter that she could do what she wanted. So the daughter went to visit Toad that same day. When she entered his room, Toad was lying on his bed. He was staring at the wall and talking to himself.
"Now, cheer up, Toad,"
she said.
"Get out of bed and be a reasonable animal. Try to eat some dinner. See, I've brought you some of mine. It's hot from the oven."
But Toad only cried and kicked his legs. The wise girl left him for a while, but she left the food there. Toad lay there and smelled the delicious food. He began to think that maybe things weren't so bad. Maybe his friends could do something to help him. Perhaps he could find some lawyers. By the time that the girl returned, Toad was feeling much better. The food helped, of course. After a couple of hours, the girl brought Toad some warm bread and tea. Toad was still very hungry because he hadn't eaten in many days. He drank his tea and ate the bread. Then he began to talk about himself. He talked about Toad Hall and all the things he did there. He also talked about how popular he was. The wise girl saw that talking was good for Toad. She said,
Toad, tell me more about Toad Hall. It sounds like a beautiful place.
Toad Hall was one of Toad's favorite subjects. He said, Toad Hall is a wonderful place. It's a home for a gentleman. It is hundreds of years old, but it is very modern. It is only 5 minutes from the church and the post office. The girl laughed.
I don't want to buy it.
She said,
Tell me something real about it. But first, let me get you some more tea and bread.
When she returned, Toad told her all about Toad Hall. He talked about the kitchen and the gardens. He described the parties that he had. The girl wanted to know all about Toad's friends, the animals. He told her all about Rat, Mole, and Badger. They talked for a long time. When it was time for the prisoners to go to bed, Toad was feeling almost normal. He went to sleep and had very nice dreams. As the days passed, Toad and the jailer's daughter became good friends. They had many long talks together. After some time, the girl began to feel very sorry for Toad. She thought that he was just a little animal, and his crime wasn't so bad. He hadn't killed or hurt anyone. She thought it was terrible that Toad had to stay in jail for 20 years. However, Toad was a very vain animal. He thought that the girl was so kind to him because she loved him. One morning the girl was very quiet. She seemed to be thinking hard about something. Toad realized that she wasn't paying attention to any of his jokes or comments.
Toad,
she said,
listen to me, please. I have an aunt who is a maid.
Don't feel bad, said Toad kindly. I have aunts who ought to be maids. They're very stupid and ugly.
Toad, be quiet,
said the girl.
Your problem is that you talk too much. I have an idea, and you're hurting my head. As I said, I have an aunt who is a maid. Every Monday and Friday, she comes to the jail and washes the prisoners' clothes. Today is a Thursday. Now, this is my idea. You are very rich, and my aunt is very poor. A few gold coins would be a lot of money for her. I think if we talked to her, we could make a deal. You could give her a little money, and she'll give you her maid's clothes to wear. Then you can escape the jail. You and my aunt are alike in some ways. For example, you're both fat.
No, we aren't alike, said Toad loudly. I have a very good figure for what I am.
So does my aunt for what she is,
said the girl.
But it's not important. You awful vain animal. I'm sorry for you, and I'm trying to help you.
Yes, thank you very much, said Toad quickly. But listen, you don't want the great Toad of Toad Hall walking around the country disguised as a maid. The girl was even angrier.
Oh, so you want to leave the jail in a shiny carriage? You can just stay here in this jail then.
Toad was vain, but he was always ready to admit when he was wrong. You are right. You are a good, kind, clever girl, he said, and I am a vain, stupid Toad.
If you will kindly introduce me to your aunt, I will pay her whatever will make her happy." So, the next evening, the girl brought her aunt into Toad's room. Toad put some gold coins out onto the table. When she saw the money, the aunt agreed to her niece's plan. However, there was one condition.
"Toad, you have to tie me up, so no one knows that I helped you to escape,"
the girl's aunt said. Toad agreed to do this. The aunt gave Toad her dress, hat, and shoes. Then they tied up the woman and put a cloth into her mouth.
"Now it's your turn, Toad,"
said the girl.
"Take off your clothes, and we'll dress you in the maid's clothes."
She helped Toad get dressed in this disguise. When she was finished, she said,
"You look just like my aunt. Now, Toad, it's time for you to go. Goodbye and good luck. If anyone talks to you, make sure to act like an old woman."
Toad was very excited and a little afraid. He walked through the jail slowly, just like an old woman. The girl's idea had worked. Everyone thought Toad was the maid. Many people spoke to him because the girl's aunt was very popular. Toad was able to act like an old lady, however. It wasn't long before he was standing outside the jail. He had escaped. Now Toad was very excited. He walked towards the town. He wasn't sure what he should do next, but he wanted to return to Toad Hall. As he walked along the road, he saw some train tracks. Then a train passed by. "There's the answer," said Toad. "I'll go to the train station and buy a ticket home. I won't have to go through the town then. Too many people know this old woman, so I can't wear her clothes for very long." Toad went to the train station. There was a large sign that had the arrival and departure times of the trains. Toad found a train that stopped near Toad Hall. It was going to leave in 30 minutes. "What luck," thought Toad. He went up to the ticket seller and asked to buy a ticket. Then he reached under the maid's dress to find his wallet, but his wallet was gone. Toad suddenly remembered that he had left his keys and money in the jail. The other passengers watched him as he stood there. He didn't know what to do. This was terrible. Finally, Toad said to the ticket seller, "Listen, I have forgotten my wallet. Just give me the ticket now. I'll send you the money tomorrow. I'm very well known in this area." The ticket seller laughed. "You're well known here. You're just a maid," he said. "Forget it, lady. Move aside, please. The other passengers want to buy their tickets." Toad left the train station. He was very upset. Now, what was he going to do? If he stayed there much longer, the police would find him. Then they would take him back to the terrible jail. He stood outside the station. He was trying to think of some answer to the problem. Then he saw a truck driver standing next to his truck and cleaning it. "Hello there, lady," said the driver. "What's wrong? You don't look very happy." "Oh, sir," cried the Toad, "I am a poor, unhappy maid, and have lost all my money. I must get home somehow, and I don't know what to do." Tears ran down his face. "Poor little lady," said the man kindly. "Do you have children at home?" "Many children," cried Toad. "They'll be so hungry, and they're all alone." "Well, here's what I'll do," said the man. "If you wash some shirts for me, I'll take you home in my truck. My clothes get very dirty when I'm working." "Oh, of course I will," cried Toad. Toad had never washed a shirt in his life, but he did not care. He thought, when I get home to Toad Hall, I'll send him money to pay for the washing. That will be better. The driver and Toad got in the truck and began to travel. Toad watched the countryside pass by. Every moment he was closer to Toad Hall. There would be a soft bed to sleep in and good things to eat.
His friends would be there, and they would listen to the story of his escape. They'll think I'm so clever, Toad thought happily. He felt so good that he began to sing songs and jump up and down. The driver was very surprised. He had met many old women before, but never one like this. They had traveled for many miles. Toad was thinking about what he would have for dinner. Suddenly he noticed that the driver looked worried. "There are some cars following us," he said. "It looks like they are police cars. I wonder what they want." Toad was very afraid. He knew he had only one chance. "Kind sir," he said, please save me. I must tell you something. I'm not an old maid with children at home. I'm really a toad. I am the wealthy and popular Mr. Toad from Toad Hall. I have just escaped from a terrible jail. My enemies put me there, but I'm innocent. Please help me." The driver looked at Toad. "Now tell me the truth," he said. "Why did they really put you in jail? What have you done?" Toad was embarrassed. "It was a very small thing," he said. "I only borrowed someone's car while they were having lunch. I didn't mean to steal it, but the police wouldn't believe me. I was very thoughtless and stupid." The driver thought for a moment. "Well, I am afraid you have been a very bad toad," he said. "But I see that you are sorry for what you have done. You seem very frightened, so I'll help you. I don't like to see animals upset. I also don't like the police very much. So cheer up, Toad. You might still escape them." The truck driver drove very fast for a while, but soon he said, "Toad, I am afraid it won't work. The police cars are very fast. There's only one thing left for us to do. Listen to me very carefully. Ahead of us there is a long tunnel. I'll drive as fast as I can through the tunnel. The police will slow down because they will be afraid of an accident. When we get out of the tunnel, you will see a large forest. I will slow down the truck. When it's safe, you must jump out of the truck. Then run and hide in the forest before the police see you. Now, are you ready? When I say jump, you jump." The driver began to drive very fast down the road. They reached the tunnel and drove through it. It was very dark. When they reached the other side, they saw the forest. The driver slowed down and then said, "Now jump." Toad jumped out of the truck and rolled down a hill. Quickly, he got up and hid behind a tree. He saw the truck driving away. Then the police cars came out of the tunnel. They had flashing red lights. Toad could hear the policeman shouting, "Stop! Stop!" He began to laugh. He was safe. But then he realized that he was alone in the woods. It was dark and cold. There was nothing to eat, and Toad Hall was still far away. He wanted to stay away from the road, so he ran into the forest. Toad had never been inside a forest before. He knew that many strange animals lived there. He kept thinking he heard people chasing after him, but there was no one. It seemed that he had really escaped. Toad suddenly felt very tired. He made himself a bed of leaves and went to sleep until morning. Chapter 9. More of Toad's Adventures. The next morning Toad woke up very early. He had been dreaming about being back at home in Toad Hall. At first he was surprised to see that he was in the forest. Where was his nice warm bed? But then he looked at his maid's clothes. He remembered everything. He remembered how he had escaped from the jail. He remembered how the police had chased him. But then he remembered that he was free. Toad felt very proud of himself for his bravery and courage. He stood up and immediately walked away. The sunshine was warm and the birds were singing. Toad felt wonderful. The only problem was he didn't know how to find Toad Hall. He hoped to see some animal that would tell him the way to go. Soon Toad found a small road and followed it. Then he saw a little canal that was flowing next to the road. Toad walked along the canal for a while, hoping to see someone. Soon he saw a large, strong-looking horse walking toward him. The horse had some thick ropes tied around his neck. He was pulling a large boat in the canal. A large, fat woman sat in the boat and was guiding it through the water. "I wonder if the person on the boat can help me," thought Toad.
"Good morning, lady,"
said the woman when she saw Toad. "Hello, madam," said Toad. "I suppose it's a nice morning to you, but I'm in serious trouble. You see, I have a daughter who's married. She wrote me a letter asking me to come and see her immediately. So I ran out of the house because I was very worried about her. You might understand, madam, if you're a mother. I've left my business of the day. You see, I have a clothes-washing business. I have 3 young children at home, and they're probably getting into trouble. I have no money, and I got lost in the forest. But I must see my married daughter. Oh, what a terrible day."
"Where does your married daughter live, madam?"
asked the woman. "She lives near the river, close to a fine house called Toad Hall," said Toad. "Maybe you have heard of it. I think it's somewhere close by."
I'm going in the direction of Toad Hall, so I'll give you a ride on my boat. Climb in,"
said the woman. She guided the boat close to the land so Toad could step in. As Toad sat down in the boat, he thought, "How lucky I am."
"So, you wash clothes, madam?"
asked the woman as they traveled.
"That's a very good business."
"Oh, yes. I have the best business in the country," said Toad. "All the rich gentlemen in the area give me their clothing to wash. They won't go to anyone else, because I know how to wash their nice clothing perfectly."
"Do you do all that work yourself?"
asked the woman. "I have 20 girls that work for me, but it's still difficult. You know how young girls are these days. They're so lazy," cried Toad. He was having fun.
"I certainly do,"
said the woman loudly.
"I'm sure you make your girls work very hard, though. Tell me, do you enjoy washing clothes?"
"I love it," said Toad. "I'm always happiest when I'm washing clothing. But of course, it's so easy for me because I'm so good at it."
"Then how lucky I am to meet you,"
said the woman.
"It's lucky for both of us."
Toad was a little nervous. "What do you mean, madam?" he asked.
"Well, I have a bag of dirty clothes over in the other corner of the boat. They need to be washed. My husband usually works with me on this boat. He guides the boat or takes care of our horse. But he's gone today. He went hunting to find a rabbit for dinner. So now I have to guide the boat, and I can't do the washing. Will you do it for me, since you're so good at it?"
Toad was worried. If only he hadn't talked so much. "Oh, don't worry about the washing," he said. "Just think about that nice rabbit your husband's going to catch. Do you have any onions? They're very delicious with rabbit meat."
"I can't think about anything but my washing,"
said the woman.
"I'm surprised you're talking about rabbits. There are clothes that need to be washed. Now, the clothes are sitting over there in that corner of the boat. There's also a bucket with some soap and water. You will have fun, since you like washing clothes, and it will help me."
"Listen, why don't you let me guide the boat?" cried Toad. He was very worried now. He didn't know how to wash clothing. Then you can wash the clothes yourself. I only wash gentlemen's clothing. It's my special skill.
I can't let you guide the boat,
said the woman.
It's very difficult. Besides, it's boring work. I want you to be happy. No, you can wash the clothes, and I'll guide the boat.
Toad saw that he had no choice. So he got the bag of clothes, the bucket, and the soap and water. Well, I suppose anyone can wash clothing. It's probably easy, he thought. However, 30 minutes later, Toad was still washing the clothes. They wouldn't come clean. Toad kept looking at the woman. He was afraid she would notice how badly he was doing. But every time he looked at her, she seemed busy with the boat. His back hurt badly. Toad said some bad words. Then he dropped the soap in the water for the 50th time. Suddenly he heard the woman laughing loudly.
I've been watching you this whole time,
she said.
I thought you couldn't be a washing woman. You're too vain. And you don't know how to wash clothes. You've never washed anything in your life. Who are you, anyway?
Toad was very angry. You stupid fat woman, he shouted. Don't talk to me like that. I am a toad. I am a very well-known, respected, and wealthy toad. I might look like a washing woman, but I will not be laughed at. The woman looked at Toad very carefully.
You are a toad,
she said.
A horrible, ugly toad. I don't like toads, and I don't want them on my boat. Come here.
Before Toad could do anything, the woman had grabbed him. She lifted him up and threw him off the boat into the water. Toad landed in the water. He had never been so angry at anyone in his life. Quickly he swam to the shore and got out of the water. He began to run after the boat as fast as he could. The woman laughed when she saw Toad running along next to the boat, but Toad didn't pay attention. He wanted revenge. Suddenly, he knew what he wanted to do. He would steal the woman's horse. First he ran and caught the horse. He untied the ropes around the horse's neck. Then he jumped on its back. He kicked the horse to make it run. Now the woman's boat wouldn't move in the water. Laughing loudly, Toad rowed away. The woman was shouting,
Stop! Stop!
I've heard those words before, said Toad as the horse ran. The horse was not able to run for very long, and soon it began to walk. Toad did not care. He thought he was very clever to steal the woman's horse. He was happy to ride the horse slowly through the countryside. Toad and the horse had traveled for some miles. Suddenly, Toad saw a man sitting by the road. He had built a fire, and he was cooking something in a pot. Suddenly, Toad realized how hungry he was. He hadn't eaten anything in 2 days. Toad got off the horse and walked slowly toward the man. He wondered how he could make the man give him some of the food. The man stared at Toad for a minute. Then he said, Do you want to sell that horse? Toad was surprised. But then he began to think about it. If he sold the horse, then he would have money, and perhaps he could make the man give him something to eat. Well, I don't know, said Toad. I like this horse very much. I don't think I want to sell him. I need a horse to carry my things. Why don't you get a donkey? Asked the man. But you don't understand. This horse is special. He's very fast and strong. He's the best horse in this area. Many people want to buy him, but I always say no. I won't sell him. But I'm curious about something. How much money would you give me for him? The man looked at the horse. I'll give you 4 coins, 1 coin for each leg, he said. 4 coins. Oh, no, that's not enough money. This horse is worth much more than that, Toad said. Well, said the man, I'll give you 5 coins for him then, but that's my final offer. Toad thought about it. He was very hungry and still some distance away from the home. The police might be looking for him. Toad remembered that the horse hadn't cost him any money. At last he said, Listen here, man, this is what we'll do. You give me 6 coins for the horse. Also give me some of that food you are cooking. It smells very delicious, and I am very hungry. Then I will give you this wonderful young horse. If that offer isn't good enough for you, just say so, and I will leave you. I know a rich man who also wants to buy this horse. The man said that 6 coins were too much, but he gave Toad the money anyway. Then he reached into a bag and pulled out a bowl and a fork. He gave Toad some of the food. It was a thick soup, with many kinds of meat and vegetables. Toad thought that it was the best food he had ever eaten. He kept asking for more. When Toad had eaten 3 bowls of the soup, he got up and thanked the man. Then he said goodbye to the horse. Fortunately, the man knew the area very well. He told Toad how to find Toad Hall. Toad walked through the fields. He was feeling wonderful now that he had eaten. His clothes were dry, and he felt big and strong. As he walked, he thought about all his adventures. How smart I am! How brave I am! I escaped everybody, he thought. No animal is better than I am. My enemies put me in jail, but I escaped. The police chased me, but I disappeared. Unfortunately, I was attacked by an evil fat woman. She threw me into the water, but then I stole her horse. Then I sold it for money and an excellent breakfast. How amazing I am! I am the handsome, popular, wealthy Toad. Toad felt so good that he began to sing a song about himself. He sang it as he walked. He felt better and better every minute, but Toad was about to have a terrible surprise. After walking for a couple of hours, Toad reached the main road. He was walking along the road when he saw something coming towards him. It was a car. This is more good luck, Toad said. I will make the driver stop the car. Then I will tell them the same story that I told the woman on the boat. Then they will offer me a ride to Toad Hall. Perhaps I will end up driving up to Toad Hall in a car. Won't Badger be surprised? He stepped into the road to wave at the car, but suddenly he felt very afraid. His heart was beating so fast that he fell down. This car was the same car that he had stolen, and the people in the car were the same people he had seen in the restaurant. Toad lay on the ground and thought, Oh no, they'll recognize me and take me back to the jail. Oh, how stupid I am! Why didn't I wait until night time? I should have gone home quietly instead of running around in the daylight. The car stopped in front of him. 2 men got out. They walked around Toad, who was lying on the road. One of them said, Oh no, this is very sad. He is a poor old woman. The heat must have made her ill. Perhaps she has not had any food today. Let's drive her to the nearest village. I'm sure she has friends there. The 2 men gently lifted Toad into the car. They made him very comfortable. Toad soon realized that these kind men did not recognize him. He felt braver. He opened his eyes and looked around him. There, she's awake now, said one of the men. The fresh air is good for her. How do you feel now, madam? Thank you very much, sir, said the Toad. I'm feeling a little better. Just sit still and don't try to talk, said the man. We'll be at the village soon. I won't talk, said Toad. I just had an idea. May I sit in the front seat of your car? There is more fresh air in the front. I might feel better then. "What a smart woman," said the man. "Of course you can." So the man helped Toad to sit in the front seat. Toad sat in the front seat and felt the cool, fresh air. He looked at the man who was driving. Suddenly Toad had an even better idea. He really wanted to drive that car again. After a few minutes, Toad said, "Please, sir, may I try to drive the car? I've been watching you, and I think I could do it. It looks very easy. I would love to tell my friends that I had driven a real car." The gentleman laughed. "I like this idea," one of them said. "We'll let her try driving. I'm sure she will be careful." So they stopped the car and let Toad sit in the driver's seat. He was very excited. Toad began to drive the car slowly down the road. The men were amazed. "Look at what a good driver she is," one of them said. Toad drove a little faster, and then even faster. Suddenly he was driving very fast. "Be careful, madam," cried one of the men. This annoyed Toad. He felt very powerful. "I'm not an old woman," he cried. "I am the Toad, the strong, powerful Toad. Sit still, and I will show you how good a driver I am." Suddenly the men realized the truth. "He is the Toad who stole our car," they cried. "Grab him! Take him back to jail! He's a crazy, dangerous animal!" One of the men tried to grab Toad. Unfortunately, he should not have done this in a moving car. Quickly, Toad turned the steering wheel. The car ran off the road. It hit some bushes, and then it fell in some thick mud. Toad's body flew through the air and landed in some soft grass. He lay there for a minute and then slowly stood up. He saw the two gentlemen sitting in the mud. Their car was sinking quickly. Toad was not hurt. He began to run away as fast as he could. After he had run for about 10 minutes, he stopped to rest. Then he began to laugh. "How clever I am! I escaped them once again. And I got to drive their car for the second time. Is there any animal more wonderful and amazing than I?" And Toad began to sing another song. But suddenly he stopped singing. There were 3 policemen running towards him as fast as they could. "Oh, how stupid I am! Sitting here and singing vain songs about myself. Now the police are going to catch me again," Toad cried. He began to run. Unfortunately, Toad was a fat animal, and his legs were short. He could hear their voices behind him. They were about to catch him. Suddenly, Toad began to fall. Then he landed in very cold water. He had run straight into the large, fast river. The river's current began to carry him away. It was hard for Toad to keep his head above water. Toad was also not a very good swimmer. "If I can just get out of this river, I'll never touch another car again," he cried. Suddenly, he noticed a large, thick tree branch hanging over the water. Toad grabbed it and held on. It was very difficult, but he pulled himself out of the water. Toad hung onto the branch. Soon he climbed onto the land. He lay there for a minute in the dirt, feeling exhausted. Where was he now? Then Toad noticed a large hole in a hill that was next to the river. The hole looked familiar. As Toad watched, he saw an animal come out of the hole and look at him. The animal had shiny brown hair, whiskers, and a long tail. It was the rat! Chapter 10. The Fight at Toad Hall. "Rat," cried Toad, "I can't believe it's you. Oh, you'll never believe all that's happened to me. I've had so many adventures. Wait until you hear how clever and brave I am. My enemies tried to harm me, but I escaped them every time." The rat looked serious. "Toad, come inside immediately. Go upstairs and take off that dress.
It looks like it belonged to a maid. Take a bath, and then put on some of my clothes. After that, come downstairs to the kitchen. I'll speak to you later." At first Toad was annoyed. He didn't like to be told what to do. But then he looked at himself in a mirror. He was very dirty and silly looking. So Toad went upstairs to take a bath and change clothes. When he came downstairs to the kitchen, Rat had made some lunch. While they ate, Toad told Rat the whole story of his adventures. He talked a lot about how great, brave, and clever he was. While Toad told his story, Rat became very quiet and serious. Finally, Toad finished his story. Rat said, "Now, Toad, please listen to me. I don't want to make you upset, but don't you understand how many mistakes you've made? You think the things you have done are exciting, good things. Well, they aren't. Do you know what all the animals are saying about you? They say that you are no good. They ask me why I am your friend, since you are always getting in trouble. You should try to think of your friends, Toad. Your actions are embarrassing to us." Toad felt a little sad. He really was a good animal, and he did not mean to cause his friends any problems. "You're right, Rat," he said. "I have been very stupid, and have acted very badly. I promise from now on to be a good Toad and stay home. I won't ever touch another car again. They're terrible." Rat was a very kind animal, and he forgave Toad almost immediately. "Now, we'll have our coffee and a nice conversation," said Toad. "Then I'll go down to Toad Hall. It will be nice to return home again. I will change my clothes and read a book. I'm going to live a quiet, respectable life from now on, Rat. No more adventures." Rat stared at him. "Wait a minute. Don't you know what's happened to Toad Hall?" Toad turned very white. "Rat, what's happened to my house? Tell me quickly." "You mean you haven't heard about the animals of the wild forest?" "What have they done?" cried Toad. "The weasels have captured Toad Hall. They're living in it now," said Rat. Toad did not say anything for a long time. Tears ran down his face. When he finally stopped crying, he said, "All right, Rat, tell me the whole story. I feel like an ordinary animal again." "Well, you were gone for a long time, you see. All the animals in the wild forest knew that you were gone. The weasels said that you would never return to Toad Hall. They said you should stay away forever. But Mole and Badger always told them you would return. All the river animals agreed with us, but the weasels didn't want you to return. They said you should be stopped." Toad went on listening. "Well, Mole and Badger moved into Toad Hall. They wanted to take care of the house for you. They didn't guess what was going to happen. One night it was dark and raining. A large group of weasels came to Toad Hall. They had many weapons. Many other animals from the wild forest came too. Mole and Badger were sitting in your living room telling stories. All the animals came into the house and attacked them. They threw Mole and Badger out of the house. They called them terrible names too." When Toad heard this last thing, he almost laughed, but he tried to look very serious. "So the weasels have been living in Toad Hall ever since that night," said Rat. "They are very dirty animals. Your house is a terrible mess. All those animals do is drink and eat your food. They tell everyone that Toad Hall is their home now. Poor Badger and Mole haven't stopped watching Toad Hall. They've been trying to think of a plan." Toad wasn't listening any more. He was too angry. "I'll make those weasels leave," he shouted. He stood up from the table and was about to run out of the house. Suddenly Rat's door opened.
Badger and Mole entered the room.
"Rat told me you were back,"
said Badger. "Welcome home, Toad." Badger looked very serious. He immediately went to find some food. He was always very serious when he was hungry. However, Mole was very happy to see Toad. "Toad, I can't believe you're back. You must have escaped. You clever animal. You'll have to tell me everything while I eat. I haven't had anything to eat since breakfast." Toad was very happy that someone wanted to listen to his stories. While Badger and Rat talked and ate, Toad told Mole the story of his adventures. He enjoyed telling Mole about how clever and brave he was. When everyone had finished eating, Badger looked at Toad very carefully. Finally he said, "Toad, you bad, terrible little animal. Look at all the trouble you have caused. You should be ashamed of yourself. Your father was a friend of mine before he died. What do you think he would say if he were here tonight? What do you think he would say if he knew about everything you've done?" Then Toad really began to cry. "I know I've been a terrible animal," he cried. "Oh, I'm so sorry." He felt very sorry for everything. He lay down on the couch and put his face in his hands. "All right, Toad," said Badger kindly.
"Don't cry so much.
"We are going to forget all about it. But now we must think of a way to get Toad Hall back. The weasels are guarding your house right now. We can't fight them in the daytime." "Oh, I'll never see my dear Toad Hall again," cried Toad. "But Toad, I have a surprise for you," said Badger. He was smiling. "Your father told me a secret that will help us. Under the ground there is a secret path. It begins near Rat's house and leads up into Toad Hall. If you follow this path, you will arrive in the inside of your house." Toad was amazed. His father had never told him this secret. "Tomorrow night the weasels are having a large party at Toad Hall. They will not be paying attention to anything. We will take some weapons with us and walk through the secret passage. The passage will take us to a little room in your house, next to the dining room. When we arrive, we will run into the dining room and attack the weasels. They won't have any weapons on them, and we can chase them away." Everyone thought this was a very good idea. Toad was a little afraid, however. He did not like the underground. The next evening, Rat gave everyone the weapons he had collected. There were sticks, knives, and a few guns. Then the four friends walked to the entrance of the secret passage. It was hidden behind some bushes. Badger said to Toad, "Toad, tonight you've got to be quiet and not talk so much. Otherwise we'll have to send you back." Toad was a little annoyed, but Badger knew that Toad did like to talk a lot. Quickly and quietly, the animals walked through the underground passage. Soon they could hear the sounds of a party. Then they were standing under Toad Hall. Toad suddenly felt very afraid. What if the weasels attacked them? What if he got hurt? But Toad also felt very angry. Toad Hall was his house. He wasn't going to let the weasels stay there. He knew he had to have courage. Quietly, Badger opened a door that was above them. The animals climbed up. They were standing at a little room that was next to the dining room. The weasels were talking and laughing. They sounded very drunk. "All right, everyone. When I say go, we run into the room," said Badger. The weasels began to sing some loud songs. "Go," whispered Badger. The animals opened the door and ran into the room. They were all shouting loudly. All the animals of the wild forest were very afraid of Badger. When they saw Badger, the weasels screamed and ran around the room. Badger had a gun in one hand and a stick in the other. Toad ran straight for the leader of the weasels. "I'll teach you to steal my house," he shouted. Mole and Rat were also fighting to the weasels. The weasels didn't know what to do. They were very drunk, and the four friends were very frightening. After a few minutes, the weasels began to run. They had never been so scared in their lives. All they wanted to do was escape. Mole, Badger, Rat, and Toad were hitting them with sticks. After a few moments, all the weasels jumped out of the windows and ran away shouting. The fight was over. Toad had returned to Toad Hall. Chapter 11. Toad Learns a Lesson. After all the weasels had run away, Badger said, "All right, Toad, we've gotten your house back for you. Now we're hungry. Why don't you go and find us something to eat?" Toad was a little annoyed at this. Why didn't Badger tell him how brave and strong he was? He had attacked the leader of the weasels. However, Toad was hungry too. So he went into the kitchen and tried to find something for them to eat. Fortunately, the weasels had left a lot of food. There was a cold chicken and some bread and cheese. Badger, Toad, and Rat were just about to sit down to eat when the kitchen door opened. Mole ran into the room. "I found some little weasels hiding in the house. They were very, very afraid of us. I didn't want to hurt them, but I made them go upstairs and clean the bedrooms. Now, we've all got nice, clean beds to sleep in tonight." "That's excellent, Mole," cried Badger. "I knew I could trust you to do the intelligent thing." Toad envied Mole a little. Badger wasn't saying such nice things to him, but then Toad realized that Mole and all his other friends were working hard for him. They cared about him, and they wanted him to have his house back. Toad did not feel envious any more. He said, "Thank you, dear Mole and Badger and Rat. Thank you for all your trouble and hard work tonight." The Badger was very pleased. He said, "There spoke my brave Toad." After eating, all the animals went to bed because they were very tired. The next morning, Toad woke up very late. When he went down to the kitchen, he saw that everyone else had already eaten. Mole and Rat were sitting outside in the warm sunshine. They were laughing and telling stories. Badger was sitting in the kitchen reading. "Toad," he said, "there is a lot of work for you to do today. Since we have won the fight against the weasels, we must have a celebration. You must send invitations to all our friends. It is the custom, you know." Toad didn't want to do any work. He said, "Badger, how can you expect me to work on a day like this? I'm going to walk around my property and make sure all my servants are all right. I'm not going to stay inside and write a lot of letters." But then Toad saw how Badger was looking at him. He said quickly, "Well, all right, Badger. I'll stay inside and write letters. I'll do anything for my friends. That's what I always say." So Toad stayed inside all morning. He wrote letters to all the animals in the neighborhood. While he was writing, he had an idea for the party. He would give speeches and sing songs. Toad always enjoyed himself at his parties. Everyone paid attention to him. So Toad wrote a plan for the party. There would be speeches and songs all by him. When Rat and Mole returned to Toad Hall that afternoon, Toad was in a very good mood. His friends were surprised. They thought Toad would be in a bad mood because he had had to work all day. Badger said, "Well, Toad, have you written the letters? I just ordered all the food for the party." "Yes, I sent the invitations today. Now here is the plan for the party," said Toad. He gave them the piece of paper with the program on it. The other three animals read it. Then Rat looked at Toad sadly. "Toad, you must understand something. At this party, you will not give any speeches, and you will not sing songs. You know that your songs are only about how great you are. When you give a speech,
it is to praise yourself. Please understand that we don't want that. Everyone will laugh at you. We're not asking you, we're just telling you." The rat felt terrible about saying these things to his friend, but he needed to tell Toad the truth. Toad said sadly, "Oh, Rat, couldn't I sing just one little song? I love to sing and give speeches." "No, not even one," said Rat. "This hurts me to say more than it hurts you to hear, Toad." Toad sat there for a long time. His head was down. His friends looked at him quietly. When he looked at them, he looked like a different Toad. "My friends," he said very sadly, "you are right, and I am wrong. I wanted everyone to pay attention to me one last time. But I know that my talking and singing would embarrass you. So from now on, I will be a very different Toad. Oh, this is a very hard world." Then Toad slowly walked out of the room. Rat said, "Badger, I feel terrible. How do you feel?"
"I feel terrible too,"
said Badger. "But you did the right thing, Rat. Toad must change his ways. We are his friends, and we want him to lead a good life. We want the other animals to respect him." The next day was the party. Toad sat in his room. He was thinking about everything that had happened. At first he was sad, but soon he began to smile and feel better. Then he had another idea. He jumped up and loudly sang a song about himself. He pretended there were other animals in the room watching him. After he finished singing, he felt a lot better. When the party began, Toad walked quietly down the stairs. All his friends were waiting for him. There were many guests at the party. Everyone went to greet Toad. They were surprised to see that he was so quiet. Some of the animals said things like, "There's our brave Toad. Toad, you must tell us the whole story." When Otter saw Toad, he shouted happily, "There's the fighter!" But Toad only said, No, I didn't do anything. It was Badger, Rat, and Mole who did all of the fighting. Let them tell the whole story." Toad's friends were amazed. Badger and Rat couldn't stop staring at Toad. It seemed that he had really changed. For the rest of the night, Toad was very quiet and calm. He asked all the guests about their families. Soon it was time to eat dinner. There was a lot of food, and it was very delicious. After the dinner, some of the animals said, "Toad, we want to hear a song or a speech." But Toad just shook his head. "No, my friends, I don't want to sing or make a speech. I'm just happy to have you all here." Toad saw how astonished Badger, Mole, and Rat were. This made him happy. After all these adventures, the 4 animals lived very happily. They did many things together. After talking with his friends, Toad sent a gift to the girl who had helped him escape from the jail. He gave her a beautiful golden necklace. Toad also sent some money to the woman whose horse he had stolen. He wrote both of these women very nice letters. Often the 4 friends would walk through the wild forest together. Now the wild forest was very safe. When the weasels saw them pass by, they would say to their children, "Look, there go 4 brave fighters." Sometimes when the weasel children were bad, their mothers would say, "If you're not good, the terrible gray badger and his friends will come and get you." When Mole, Rat, Toad, and Badger heard about this, they thought it was very funny. They all liked children. However, the little weasels believed their mothers. It was some time before they discovered that Badger and his friends were very nice animals after all. The end.